In the dead of night, a frantic knock echoes through 221B Baker Street, shattering the silence. A terrified young writer, Clara Hawthorne, clutches an antique inkwell that whispers secrets and moves on its own, cursed, she claims, by her occultist. Grandfather's dark legacy. Why does it glow under moonlight? What ancient force stirs within its arcane carvings? Sherlock Holmes, the master of reason, takes the case, but as he unravels a web of ciphers, secret societies, and alchemical deceit, each clue raises more questions than answers. Is the inkwell a portal to the supernatural or a cunning hoax designed to manipulate minds? In a race against a shadowy cult, Holmes and Watson must navigate foggy warehouses, cryptic manuscripts, and ghostly apparitions to expose the truth before. The Order of the Saffron Veil unleashes a power that could bend reality itself. Will logic triumph, or will the unknown claim them all? Chapter 1. The Midnight Summons, the clock in the sitting room of 221B. Baker Street had just struck midnight when a sharp, insistent knocking shattered the silence. Sherlock Holmes, seated by the fire with a volume of obscure chemical treatises, raised an eyebrow but did not immediately stir. Dr. John Watson, dozing in an armchair with a half-read medical journal splayed across his lap, jolted upright, his hand instinctively reaching for the service revolver he no longer carried. The knocking persisted, urgent and unyielding. Like the pulse of a man in fear for his life. "Mrs. Hudson will have a fit," Watson muttered, rubbing sleep from his eyes as he rose. Who could it be at this hour? Holmes closed his book. With a deliberate snap, his lean frame unfolding from the chair with the grace of a panther. Someone in distress, Watson. The rhythm of the knocks, 3 short, 2 long, suggests a pattern born of desperation, not indecision. Let us see. Who dares disturb the night? They descended the stairs, the gaslight casting long shadows that danced across the wallpaper. Mrs. Hudson, already at the door in her dressing gown, shot them a look of weary resignation before opening it. A young woman stood on the threshold, her face pale as moonlight, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of terror and determination. Her auburn hair, pinned haphazardly, spilled in tendrils beneath a bonnet askew, and her gloved hands clutched a small, intricately carved wooden box. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I am Clara Hawthorne. I beg you to help me. It's this." She thrust the box forward, as if eager to be rid of it. "It's haunted." Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes, who gestured for the woman to enter. They ushered her into the sitting room, where the firelight flickered over the box's surface, revealing etchings of arcane symbols, spirals, stars, and glyphs that seemed to writhe in the shifting light. Clara sank into a chair, her hands twisting in her lap. "Haunted, you say?" Holmes's tone was neutral, but his eyes gleamed with the spark of a puzzle. A bold claim. "Pray, Miss Hawthorne, elaborate." Clara took a shuddering breath. "This Inkwell belonged to my grandfather, Elias Hawthorne, an antiquarian with peculiar interests. He studied the occult, collected strange artifacts, and wrote of things no sane man should know. He died a year ago, leaving me his estate. I found this among his effects. At first, I thought it merely a curiosity, but then—" She paused, her gaze darting to the box. "It moves on its own. At night I hear whispers words I can't understand, like voices from another world, and sometimes it glows." Watson leaned forward, his skepticism warring with curiosity. An inkwell that moves and speaks? Surely, Miss Hawthorne, it could be a trick of the light, or perhaps a draught. I thought so too, Clara replied, her voice rising. But I've seen it slide across my desk when no one was near. I've locked it in a drawer, only to find it on the mantel the next morning. And the whispers, they're clearest at midnight, always at midnight. I'm not mad, Dr. Watson. I'm a writer, not given to fancies, but this frightens me. Holmes took the box, turning it over in his hands. The wood was dark, polished to a sheen, and the carvings seemed to pulse faintly, though Watson attributed it to the firelight. Holmes's fingers traced the symbols, his expression unreadable. These markings, he said, almost to himself, are not mere decoration. They resemble sigils from certain esoteric traditions, perhaps Rosicrucian. Or older still. Tell me, Miss Hawthorne, have you used the inkwell? Once, Clara admitted, her cheeks flushing. I dipped a pen in it, thinking to write. The ink was black as pitch, and it felt wrong. The words I wrote twisted into shapes I didn't intend, like a script I couldn't read. I burned the paper. Holmes's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Wise, and has anyone else shown interest in this artifact? Clara hesitated. My grandfather's solicitor, Mr. Gilead, urged me to sell it. He said it was valuable, but I refused. He seemed overly insistent. And last week, I saw a man watching my house, a tall figure in a cloak, always at dusk. I think he's after the inkwell. Holmes set the box on the table, his eyes narrowing. A curious case indeed. Miss Hawthorne, I shall require the inkwell for examination. You will return home, lock your doors, and speak of this to no one. Watson and I will call on you tomorrow. Clara nodded, relief washing over her face. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I didn't know where else to turn. As Mrs. Hudson showed her out, Watson turned to Holmes. You don't believe this nonsense about a haunted inkwell, surely? It's likely a mechanical trick, or the girl's overwrought. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a spectre. I believe in nothing, Watson, until the evidence speaks, but the symbols, the movement, the whispers, these suggest a design, not a delusion. Someone or something wants this inkwell noticed. Let us see what secrets it holds. They sat in silence, the fire crackling, until Holmes rose and placed the inkwell on the mantel. We shall keep it here tonight, he said. If it moves, we'll know. Watson retired to bed, his mind uneasy. He woke hours later to a faint. Sound a scratching like a quill on paper. Creeping downstairs, he found Holmes awake, staring at the inkwell. It sat precisely where they'd left it, but now, under the moonlight streaming through the window, it emitted a soft, unearthly glow. Holmes's face was alight with fascination. Interesting, he murmured. Very interesting indeed. The night passed without further incident, though Watson slept fitfully, his dreams haunted by visions of quills writing in blood. Morning brought a gray London dawn, and with it, a renewed sense of purpose. Holmes was already at work, sketching the inkwell's symbols on a sheet of paper, his brow furrowed in concentration. These sigils, he said, as Watson joined him, are not random. They correspond to a cipher used by alchemical societies in the 17th century. I suspect your Miss Hawthorne's grandfather was no mere dabbler in the occult. He was part of something larger, perhaps a secret order. Watson poured coffee, his skepticism undimmed. A secret order? Holmes, you're letting this girl's tale get to you. It's probably a clever forgery, meant to scare her into selling. Perhaps, Holmes conceded, but the craftsmanship of the Inkwell suggests otherwise. The wood is ebony, rare and costly, and the carvings are precise, not the work of a charlatan. And then there's the glow. Did you mark it last night? No phosphorescent paint, I know, could produce such an effect without leaving residue. Watson frowned. So what's your plan? We visit Miss Hawthorne's home today, Holmes said, folding his sketch. I wish to see where this Inkwell has been kept and whether her mysterious cloaked figure has left traces. Then we shall investigate. This Mr. Gilead, his eagerness to acquire the Inkwell is suggestive. They took a hansom cab to Clara's modest townhouse in Bloomsbury, a neat but unassuming dwelling with ivy creeping up its brick facade. Clara greeted them, her face still pale but composed. She led them to her study, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a heavy oak desk. The air smelled faintly of ink and old paper. This is where it happens, Clara said, pointing to the desk. I've seen it move here, always at night. The whispers come from there, too. Holmes examined the desk, his magnifying glass glinting as he studied every inch. He tapped the wood, tested the drawers, and peered beneath the desk, his movements swift and precise. No hidden mechanisms, he murmured. No wires, no springs. Curious. Watson, meanwhile, inspected the windows. No signs of forced entry, he reported. But the lock on this one is loose. Someone could have tampered with it. Holmes nodded, his gaze falling on a faint scuff mark on the floor near the desk. A boot, Watson. Size 10, with a distinctive tread likely a workman's, but recently polished. Our cloaked watcher, perhaps? Clara gasped. You think someone's been inside? Possibly, Holmes said. But the Inkwell's behavior suggests more than a simple break-in. Tell me, Miss Hawthorne, where did your grandfather acquire this artifact? Clara frowned, thinking. He never said. His journals mention travels to Prague, Venice, and Istanbul, where he collected oddities. He was obsessed with the idea of hidden knowledge texts that could unlock secrets of the universe. I thought it nonsense, but he believed. Holmes's eyes gleamed. His journals. May we see them? Clara hesitated, then retrieved a stack of leather-bound volumes from a locked cabinet. These are his last entries, she said. I haven't read them all. They're dense, and some are in code. Holmes flipped through the pages, his fingers pausing on a passage written in a cramped, hurried hand. This, he said, mentions the Inkwell explicitly. The vessel of the scribe, he calls it, crafted to hold the essence of an ancient power. He writes of a ritual, incomplete, and a warning. Beware the order of the saffron veil. Watson raised an eyebrow. The saffron veil? Sounds like a theatrical troupe, not a threat. Holmes ignored the jibe, his mind racing. The order is no fiction, Watson. I've encountered references to it before. A secretive group, rumored to guard forbidden knowledge. If they seek this Inkwell, they believe it holds power, real or imagined. Clara shivered. What should I do, Mr. Holmes? Remain here, Holmes said. Keep the journals safe. Watson and I will pursue this Mr. Gilead and investigate. The order. The Inkwell stays with us. It's safer at Baker Street. Holmes ignored the jibe, his mind racing. The order is no fiction, Watson. I've encountered references to it before, a secretive group rumored to guard forbidden's knowledge. If they seek this Inkwell, they believe it holds power, real or imagined. Clara shivered. What should I do, Mr. Holmes? Remain here, Holmes said. Keep the journals safe. Watson and I will pursue this Mr. Gilead and investigate the order. The Inkwell stays with us. It's safer at Baker Street. Clara agreed, though her eyes lingered on the box with unease. Holmes and Watson returned to their lodgings, the Inkwell tucked securely in Holmes's coat. As they rode through London's bustling streets, Watson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A glance out the cab's window revealed nothing but the usual throng of pedestrians, yet the air felt heavy with unseen eyes. Back at Baker Street, Holmes placed the Inkwell on a side table away from the mantel. We'll observe it tonight, he said. If it moves or whispers, we'll catch it in the act. Watson, though dubious, agreed to keep watch. They settled into their chairs, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. The hours ticked by, the silence broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. Watson's eyelids grew heavy, but Holmes remained alert, his gaze fixed on the Inkwell dot at precisely midnight. A sound broke the stillness, a faint, rhythmic scratching like a quill scraping parchment. Watson sat up, his heart pounding. The Inkwell remained still, but the air seemed to hum with a strange energy. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Listen, he whispered. It's not the Inkwell itself. The sound comes from within. Watson strained his ears. The scratching grew louder, joined by a low, sibilant whisper words in a language he couldn't place, rising and falling like a chant. The Inkwell began to tremble, its carvings catching the lamplight in a way that made them seem alive. Holmes sprang to his feet, seizing the Inkwell. He tilted it, and a faint glow emanated from its interior, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Fascinating, he said, his voice calm but intense. This is no ordinary trick. There's something inside, perhaps a chemical, or... Before he could finish, the glow faded and the whispers ceased. The Inkwell sat inert in his hands, as ordinary as any desk ornament. Watson let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. What the devil was that? He demanded. Holmes set the Inkwell down, his expression one of quiet triumph. A clue, Watson, a very promising clue. Tomorrow we dig deeper. For now, let us rest, but keep your revolver close. As Watson climbed the stairs to his room, the memory of the whispers lingered, chilling him more than the winter night. Holmes, however, remained by the fire, his mind already racing toward the next piece of the puzzle. The Inkwell, silent now, seemed to watch him, its secrets locked within its ancient wood. The case of the haunted Inkwell had begun, and Sherlock Holmes was determined to unravel its mysteries, whatever they might be. Chapter 2. The Cryptic Manuscript. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains of 221B Baker Street, casting long shadows across the cluttered sitting room. Sherlock Holmes sat at his desk, the antique Inkwell positioned before him. Like a silent sentinel, its bronze surface, etched with arcane symbols, glinted faintly in the morning glow. Dr. John Watson, still bleary from the previous night's interruption, poured himself a cup of tea, his eyes fixed on Holmes, who had not slept since Clara Hawthorne's departure. Holmes's fingers traced the Inkwell's carving spirals, crescents and jagged lines that seemed to writhe under scrutiny. "A curious artifact, Watson," he murmured, his voice low and precise. "These symbols are not mere decoration. They suggest a purpose, though whether ornamental or functional remains to be seen." Watson, settling into an armchair, frowned. "Functional? Holmes, you don't mean to suggest this thing is haunted?" Clara's tales of whispers and movement sound like the product of an overactive imagination, or perhaps too much laudanum. Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. Imagination, perhaps. But trickery is more likely. The human mind is prone to seeing specters where there are only shadows. Still, the Inkwell's behavior under moonlight last night, its faint luminescence, demands investigation. I suspect a mechanism or chemical agent at play. He tilted the Inkwell, examining its base. His keen eyes narrowed as he pressed a small, almost imperceptible ridge. With a soft click, a hidden panel sprang open, revealing a tightly rolled parchment fragment nestled within. Holmes extracted it with the care of a surgeon, unfurling it on the desk. The paper was brittle, its edges frayed, and it bore a dense script in an unfamiliar cipher. Watson leaned forward, his skepticism warring with curiosity. "What is it, Holmes? A letter? A map?" "A cipher, Watson," Holmes replied, his voice tinged with excitement. "And a complex one at that. The symbols are not Latin nor any common alphabet. They resemble a cryptographic system, perhaps, tied to occult traditions. This Inkwell is more than a writer's tool, it's a vessel for secrets." Holmes spent the morning analyzing the parchment, his desk soon littered with notes, reference books, and half-empty teacups. Watson, though no stranger to Holmes's methods, marveled at the intensity of his focus. The detective cross-referenced the cipher against texts on cryptography, from Vigenère to alchemical codes, muttering to himself as patterns emerged. By midday, he had deciphered a portion of the text, his pen scratching furiously as he transcribed. "It speaks of the Order of the Saffron Veil," Holmes announced, leaning back in his chair. "A secret society, purportedly extinct since the 17th century, dedicated to esoteric knowledge. This fragment mentions a ritual tied to an object, likely our Inkwell, and a scribe who holds forbidden truths. The language is deliberately obscure, but it hints at a larger manuscript, of which this is but a piece." Watson's brow furrowed. "A secret society? Holmes, this sounds like something out of a penny dreadful. Are you suggesting Clara's grandfather was mixed up with these people?" "Possibly," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. "Clara mentioned her grandfather was an occultist, a collector of arcane artifacts. This Inkwell, with its hidden compartment, suggests he was more than a dabbler. The Order may have sought him out, or he them. Our task is to find the rest of this manuscript. It may hold the key to the Inkwell's peculiarities." Holmes's research led him to a name, Gilead's Rare Books, a shop in London's East End known for its obscure tomes. "If the rest of the manuscript exists, Gilead's is the likeliest place to find it," he said, rising and donning his coat. "Come, Watson, the game is afoot." The East End was a labyrinth of narrow streets and soot-stained buildings, the air thick with the tang of coal smoke and the cries of street vendors. Gilead's Rare Books stood at the end of a crooked alley, its sign weathered and peeling. The shop's windows were grimy, offering only glimpses of shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound volumes. Inside, the air was heavy with the musty scent of old paper. Mr. Gilead, a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, greeted them with a nervous smile. "Gentlemen, welcome. Are you seeking something specific?" Holmes's gaze swept the shop, noting the chaotic arrangement of books and the faint tremor in Gilead's hands. "We are interested in manuscripts related to the Order of the Saffron Veil," he said, his tone casual but probing. "Particularly those involving ciphers or arcane rituals." Gilead's smile faltered, his eyes darting to the shadows. "The Order? I am afraid I know nothing of such things." "Just a myth, surely. I deal in books, not conspiracies." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Indeed. Yet your shop is renowned for its esoteric collection. Perhaps you've come across a manuscript fragment written in cipher tied to an object of occult significance?" Gilead's hands shook as he adjusted his spectacles. No. Nothing like that. You'd best try elsewhere." Watson, sensing the man's unease, stepped forward. "Mr. Gilead, we mean no trouble. We're simply trying to help a young woman who's been disturbed by an artifact. If you know anything, it could save her a great deal of distress." Before Gilead could respond, a crash echoed from the back of the shop. Holmes's head snapped toward the sound, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver he kept in his coat. "Stay here, Watson," he said, moving toward the rear door. But Watson, ever loyal, followed. They entered a cramped storeroom, its shelves stacked with unsorted books. A figure in a dark cloak stood at the far end, rifling through a crate. The intruder spun, revealing a masked face, and hurled a heavy tome at Holmes. The detective ducked, the book crashing into a shelf and sending a cascade of papers to the floor. "Stop him," Holmes shouted, lunging forward. The intruder bolted, knocking over a table as he fled through a back door into the alley. Holmes gave chase, Watson close behind, their boots pounding on the cobblestones. The alley twisted and turned, but the intruder was swift, vanishing into the crowd. Breathing heavily, Watson leaned against a wall. "Blast it, Holmes, he's gone." "Who was that?" "A member of the Order, or their hireling," Holmes said, his eyes scanning the alley. "They're watching Gilead or protecting something in that shop. We must return." Back at Gilead's, the shopkeeper was pale, his hands wringing. "I told you, I know nothing," he insisted, but his voice cracked with fear. Holmes fixed him with a piercing stare. "Mr. Gilead, your nervousness betrays you. You know of the Order, and you fear them. Tell us what you know, or the next visit may not be ours." Gilead sank into a chair, defeated. I've heard whispers. The Order of the Saffron Veil, they're not a myth. They seek artifacts, old ones, tied to rituals. I found a manuscript. Fragment years ago, part of a larger text. I sold it to a collector, but I swear I don't know where it is now. Holmes's expression remained impassive. "Describe the fragment." "It was old, written in a cipher I couldn't read. It mentioned a ritual, something about awakening the scribe. I didn't understand it, but the buyer paid handsomely." "That's all I know." Holmes nodded, his mind already racing. "Very well. We'll need the name of that buyer." Gilead hesitated, then scribbled a name on a scrap of paper. "Lady Eleanor Vance. She's a recluse. Lives in a manor outside London. That's all I can tell you." Holmes pocketed the paper. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Gilead. I suggest you Lock your doors tonight." As they left the shop, Watson glanced at Holmes. "Do you believe him?" "Partially," Holmes replied. "He knows more than he admits, but his fear is genuine. The order is active, and they want that manuscript. Lady Vance is our next lead." The journey back to Baker Street was quiet, the weight of the mystery settling over them. In the sitting room, Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling around him like a shroud. "The Inkwell is the key, Watson," he said. "Its mechanism, its cipher, its connection to the order all point to a larger design. We must find the rest of that manuscript before the order does." Watson nodded, though unease lingered in his chest. "And if it's not a trick? What if there's something unnatural about this Inkwell?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Then we shall uncover it, Watson. Truth, not superstition, will solve this riddle." The chapter closed with Holmes poring over the ciphered fragment, his mind a whirl of possibilities, while Watson watched, knowing their next step would lead them deeper into the shadows of the Order of the Saffron Veil. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Bookshop, the morning after Clara Hawthorne's midnight visit. A heavy fog clung to London streets, shrouding the city in a damp gray veil. Sherlock Holmes, clad in his greatcoat, strode purposefully through the mist, his sharp eyes scanning the cobbled lanes of the East End. Dr. John Watson, ever the faithful companion, matched his pace, though his expression betrayed a mix of curiosity and unease. The Inkwell, now nestled securely in Holmes's satchel, seemed to weigh heavier than its size suggested, its arcane carvings glinting faintly in his mind's eye. Their destination was Gilead's Rare Books, a narrow shop tucked between a pawnbroker and a tavern reeking of stale ale. The lead had come from Holmes's deciphering of the manuscript fragment found in the Inkwell's hidden compartment, a cryptic reference to the keeper of tomes in London's East End. Holmes had cross-referenced this with his mental catalogue of the city's obscure haunts, landing on Gilead's shop, known to bibliophiles and eccentrics alike for its collection of esoteric texts. As they approached, the shop's warped signboard creaked in the damp air, its faded letters barely legible. The windows were smeared with grime, obscuring the interior, but a faint glow of lamplight flickered within. Holmes paused at the door, his gloved hand resting on the handle. "Watson," he said, his voice low, "observe the surroundings. The East End is a labyrinth of secrets, and this shop is no exception. Stay alert." Watson nodded, his hand instinctively brushing the revolver in his coat pocket. "You suspect this Gilead knows more than he lets on?" "I suspect everyone knows more than they let on," Holmes replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "The question is whether Mr. Gilead's knowledge is deliberate or merely incidental." With that, he pushed open the door, triggering a jangling bell that echoed in the cramped space. The air inside was thick with the musty scent of old leather and decaying paper. Shelves towered to the ceiling, crammed with books of every size, their spines cracked and titles faded. Dust motes danced in the slanting light from a single oil lamp on the counter, where a stooped figure stood hunched over a ledger. Mr. Gilead, the shop's proprietor, was a wiry man with a face like crumpled parchment. His spectacles perched precariously on his nose, and his fingers, stained with ink, trembled slightly as he looked up. His eyes darted between Holmes and Watson, lingering on the satchel at Holmes's side. "Good morning, gentlemen," Gilead said, his voice reedy but polite. "Welcome to my humble shop. Are you seeking something specific or merely browsing? Holmes stepped forward, his presence commanding the dim room. Mr. Gilead, I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my associate, Dr. Watson. We are in pursuit of a particular manuscript, one that may be connected to an item in our possession. He patted the satchel lightly, watching Gilead's reaction. The shopkeeper's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he schooled his features into a mask of indifference. Manuscripts, you say? I have many, though most are unremarkable. Perhaps you could describe it. Holmes leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. It is a fragment, written in a cipher, with references to an organization known as the Order of the Saffron Veil. I have reason to believe the rest of this manuscript may reside in your collection. Gilead's hand froze on the ledger, his knuckles whitening. The Order of the Saffron Veil? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm afraid I've never heard of such a thing. As for ciphers, I deal in books, not codes. Holmes's eyes narrowed, catching the slight tremor in Gilead's voice. Curious, he said, pacing slowly along a shelf, his fingers brushing the spines. Your shop is renowned for its unusual inventory. Surely a man of your expertise would recognize the name. Watson, standing near the door, glanced outside, his instincts honed by years of danger. The fog seemed thicker now, and indistinct shapes moved in the haze passers-by, perhaps, or something more sinister. He turned back to the conversation, noting Gilead's growing unease. I assure you, Mr. Holmes, Gilead said, adjusting his spectacles, I deal in literature, not conspiracies. If you'll excuse me, I have inventory to attend to. Before he could finish, a loud crash shattered the silence. The shop's front window exploded inward, glass shards scattering across the floor. 3 masked figures, clad in dark cloaks, burst through the wreckage, their movements swift and coordinated. The first brandished a cudgel, the second a dagger, and the third a revolver, its barrel glinting in the lamplight. Watson down! Holmes shouted, already in motion. He seized a heavy tome from the nearest shelf and hurled it at the revolver-wielding thug, striking his wrist. The gun clattered to the floor as Watson dove behind a bookcase. Drawing his own revolver, Gilead shrieked, ducking behind the counter. No, no, please, he cried, his voice drowned out by the chaos. The cudgel-wielding attacker lunged at Holmes, swinging with brutal force. Holmes sidestepped with the grace of a fencer, grabbing a brass paperweight from a table and smashing it against the man's temple. The thug crumpled, unconscious, as Holmes spun to face the second attacker. Watson, meanwhile, grappled with the dagger-wielding figure. The man was wiry but strong, his blade flashing dangerously close to Watson's chest. With a surge of adrenaline, Watson drove his knee into the man's stomach, sending him staggering back. A well-placed punch sent the attacker sprawling, his dagger skittering across the floor. The third thug, recovering from Holmes's book-throwing assault, scrambled for his revolver. Holmes was faster. He kicked the weapon under a shelf and tackled the man, pinning him to the ground. Who sent you? Holmes demanded, his voice cold as steel. The thug spat, his eyes blazing with defiance. You'll get nothing from me. Detective. Holmes pressed harder, twisting the man's arm. We shall see. Watson, catching his breath, secured the second attacker with a length of cord from a curtain. Gilead emerged from behind the counter, trembling, his spectacles askew. What is happening?" he stammered. "Who are these men?" Holmes ignored him, focusing on the pinned thug. "You wear the mark of the saffron veil," he said, yanking up the man's sleeve to reveal a tattoo of a veiled figure, holding a quill. "Your masters are careless to send such obvious agents." The thug sneered but said nothing. Holmes stood, brushing dust from his coat. "Watson, bind this one as well. Mr. Gilead, you will explain yourself now, or I shall. Assume you summoned these ruffians." Gilead shook his head frantically. "I swear I had no part in this. I only know rumors of the order. They're dangerous, Mr. Holmes. They seek things objects of power. That inkwell you carry, it's no ordinary trinket." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "Go on." Gilead hesitated, glancing at the unconscious thugs. "There's a manuscript," he whispered. "Not here, but hidden in the back. It's part of what they seek. I didn't want to get involved, but they threatened me." "Show me," Holmes commanded. Gilead led them to a cluttered storeroom where he pried up a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a small, locked box. Holmes picked the lock with a hairpin from his pocket, revealing a second fragment of the manuscript, its parchment brittle but intact. The cipher matched the first fragment, and Holmes's quick mind began piecing together its meaning. "It speaks of a ritual," Holmes murmured, scanning the text. "The inkwell is a vessel meant to channel something or someone. The order believes it holds the key to their ambitions." Watson frowned. "But why attack us now?" Holmes pocketed the fragment. "Because we are close, Watson. Too close. Mr. Gilead, you will come with us. Your safety is no longer guaranteed here." Gilead protested weakly, but Holmes's stern gaze silenced him. As they prepared to leave, Watson glanced at the bound thugs. "What about them?" "The police will handle them," Holmes said, already heading for the door. "We have a larger game afoot." Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the street in a ghostly haze. Holmes's mind raced, connecting the manuscript, the order, and the inkwell's eerie properties. Gilead's fear was genuine, but his knowledge was incomplete. The order of the saffron veil was closing in, and Holmes knew their next move would be bold or dot as they vanished into the fog. The shop stood silent, its broken window a testament to the danger now trailing them. The second manuscript fragment, tucked safely in Holmes's satchel, held the promise of answers, but also the shadow of greater peril. Chapter 4. The saffron veils trailed, the fog hung thick over London's docks, a cloying shroud that muffled the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of gulls. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson moved swiftly through the narrow alleys of the East End, their footsteps echoing softly on the slick cobblestones. The night was heavy with the scent of damp wood and tar, and the faint glow of gaslights barely pierced the haze. Holmes, clad in a nondescript overcoat to blend with the dockworkers, led the way, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow. Watson, a step behind, clutched the handle of his revolver beneath his cloak. His nerves taut, but his trust in Holmes unwavering. Their destination was a warehouse near the Thames, its sagging timbers and rusted iron doors barely visible through the mist. Holmes had learned from the stolen manuscript fragment that the Order of the Saffron Veil, a secretive society tied to the mysterious Inkwell, held clandestine meetings here. The fragment had mentioned a ritual, cryptic and foreboding, centered On awakening the scribe. Holmes had dismissed the supernatural implications with a curt wave of his hand, but the urgency in the text suggested a plot worth unraveling. Posing as antiquarians with an interest in occult relics, he and Watson aimed to infiltrate the gathering and uncover the Order's true purpose. Holmes paused at a corner, raising a hand to halt Watson. "Listen," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the lapping of the river against the docks. From the warehouse ahead came a low murmur, like the hum of a distant hive. Watson strained his ears, catching snatches of voices, formal, rhythmic, almost chant-like. Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. "They're already assembled. Excellent. Our timing is impeccable." He adjusted the false spectacles perched on his nose, part of his disguise as a scholar of arcane artifacts. Watson, similarly attired, in a slightly ill-fitting suit and a scarf to obscure his face, felt a pang of unease. "Holmes, are you certain this will work?" "If they suspect us, they won't," Holmes interrupted, his tone crisp. "The Order thrives on secrecy, but secrecy breeds paranoia. They'll be too focused on their own rituals to scrutinize us closely. Stay close, speak little, and follow my lead." Watson nodded, though his grip on the revolver tightened. They approached the warehouse, its entrance guarded by a hulking figure in a hooded cloak. The man's face was shadowed, but his bulk suggested he was more brawn than brain. Holmes stepped forward, adopting a slight stoop to enhance his scholarly. "Guys, good evening," he said, his voice tinged with a nervous quiver. "We are D.R.'s, Mortimer and Blackwood, antiquarians from Oxford. We were invited by Mr. Gilead to discuss certain relics." The guard's eyes narrowed, but he produced a ledger from beneath his cloak. "Names," he growled. "Dr. James." "Mortimer and Dr. Henry Blackwood," Holmes replied smoothly, gesturing to himself and Watson. "We specialize in alchemical artifacts. Mr. Gilead assured us the Order would welcome our expertise." The guard scanned the ledger, his thick fingers tracing the pages. Watson held his breath, aware that Gilead, the nervous bookshop owner, had no knowledge of their plan. Holmes had banked on the man's fear of the Order preventing him from attending, and thus far the gamble seemed to hold. After a tense moment, the guard grunted and stepped aside. "Inside. Don't wander." Holmes inclined his head graciously, and they slipped through the door into the warehouse's cavernous interior. The air was damp and heavy, smelling of mildew and something sharper in scents, perhaps, or some chemical residue. Dim lanterns cast flickering shadows across crates and barrels, and, at the far end, a group of figures stood in a loose circle, their faces obscured by saffron-colored veils. The sight sent a chill down Watson's spine, though Holmes appeared unruffled, his eyes darting about to catalogue every detail. The warehouse was a maze of stacked crates, some labeled with foreign ports, Calcutta, Alexandria, Shanghai, a makeshift. Altar stood at the circle's center, draped in yellow cloth and adorned with candles that burned with an oddly steady flame. On it rested a small wooden box, its surface etched with symbols matching those on Clara Hawthorne's Inkwell. Holmes's gaze lingered on the box, his expression one of intense curiosity. The leader of the group, a tall figure whose veil was edged with gold, raised a hand for silence. "Brothers and sisters of the saffron veil," he intoned, his voice resonant and commanding, "we gather to reclaim what was lost. The scribe awaits, bound by the alchemist's craft, ready to grant us knowledge beyond mortal ken. The Inkwell is near. We must act swiftly." Watson glanced at Holmes, who gave a slight nod, signaling him to remain silent. The other members murmured assent, their voices a mix of reverence and anticipation. Holmes edged closer to the circle, his movements subtle, as if drawn by scholarly fascination. Watson followed, his heart pounding. The leader continued, detailing a plan to retrieve the Inkwell from the writer's grasp, clearly Clara, and perform a ritual at an undisclosed location. The phrase, "awaken the scribe," recurred, each mention laced with a fervor that made Watson uneasy. Holmes leaned toward a nearby crate, pretending to examine a label while eavesdropping. Watson mimicked him, though his attention was drawn to a faint noise, a soft scrape, like boots on wood, coming from the shadows beyond the circle. He nudged Holmes, who gave a barely perceptible shake of his head, indicating he'd heard it too. The orders meeting was not as private as they believed. The leader's speech grew more urgent. The Inkwell's power is no myth. The alchemists' notes, preserved by our forebears, confirm it. Once activated, the scribe will write truths hidden from the world's secrets of life, death, and what lies beyond. We must secure it before others interfere. Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest, though Watson knew he was parsing the words for practical clues, not supernatural promises. The mention of others suggested the order feared rivals, perhaps the thugs who had attacked them at Gilead's bookshop. Watson's hand hovered near his revolver, his instincts warning of danger. The scraping sound grew louder, and a figure emerged from the shadows, a wiry man in a dark coat, his face half covered by a scarf. He moved with purpose, slipping behind a stack of crates near the altar. Holmes's posture stiffened, but he maintained his guise, whispering to Watson, "A thief, likely after the same prize. Stay alert." The meeting continued, oblivious to the intruder. The leader produced a key from his robes and unlocked the wooden box, revealing a velvet-lined interior. Inside lay a single sheet of parchment, its edges frayed but its text intact. "This," he declared, "is the final piece of the alchemist's cipher. With it, we can complete the ritual." He held it aloft, and the members leaned forward, their veils fluttering. The intruder chose that moment to act. With a swift lunge, he darted toward the altar, snatching the parchment from the leader's hand. Chaos erupted. The order's members shouted, some drawing knives from beneath their cloaks. The guard from the entrance barreled into the fray, his bulk knocking over crates. Holmes seized the opportunity, grabbing Watson's arm. "Now," he hissed, pulling him toward the altar. Watson's military instincts kicked in. He shoved a crate into the path of an approaching cultist, buying them seconds. Holmes reached the altar and, with a deft movement, pocketed a small object, a brass medallion that had fallen from the box in the scuffle. The thief, meanwhile, sprinted toward a side exit, the parchment clutched tightly. The leader bellowed orders, and several members gave chase, their saffron veils trailing like specters in the dim light. Holmes and Watson followed, weaving through the maze of crates. The warehouse's layout was disorienting, but Holmes navigated it with uncanny precision, as if he'd memorized its structure in the brief moments they'd been inside. They emerged into a narrow alley just in time to see the thief vanish around a corner, pursued by two cultists. The fog swallowed their forms, but their footsteps echoed. Holmes paused, his breath visible in the cold air. "We can't lose that parchment," he said, his voice low but urgent. "It's the key to their ritual and our next clue." Watson nodded, adrenaline surging. "Do we follow the thief or the cultists?" "The thief," Holmes decided. "He's an opportunist, not a zealot. He'll be easier to intercept." They set off, their pace brisk but cautious. The alleys twisted and turned, each one darker than the last. The thief's footsteps grew fainter, but Holmes's keen senses kept them on his trail. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a pile of discarded crates, behind which the thief crouched, panting. He was young, no older than 20, with sharp features and a desperate glint in his eyes. The parchment was stuffed into his coat. Holmes stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Hand it over, lad. You're in over your head." The thief's hand darted to a knife at his belt, but Watson was faster, drawing his revolver and leveling it. "Don't," he warned. The thief froze, his eyes flicking between them. "I don't want trouble," he stammered. "Just wanted the paper, worth a fortune to the right buyer." Holmes's expression softened, though his eyes remained sharp. "Who hired you?" The thief hesitated, then muttered, "Nobody. Heard about the orders meetings. Thought I'd nick something valuable." Holmes studied him, then extended a hand. "The parchment." Now, reluctantly, the thief handed it over. Holmes unfolded it, his eyes scanning the ciphered text. "As I suspected," he murmured. "Another piece of the puzzle." He pocketed it, then turned to the thief. "Go, and forget you were here." The thief didn't need to be told twice. He bolted into the fog, leaving Holmes and Watson alone in the alley. But the reprieve was brief. The sound of running footsteps approached multiple sets, heavy and purposeful. The cultists had caught up. Holmes grabbed Watson's arm, pulling him behind a stack of barrels. "We've overstayed our welcome," he whispered. "Back to Baker Street. We have what we need." They slipped through the alleys, using the fog as cover. The cultist shouts grew distant, but Watson's heart didn't stop racing until they reached the relative safety of a main street where a hansom cab awaited. Inside, Holmes leaned back, the brass medallion glinting in his hand as he examined it under the cab's dim lantern. "What is it?" Watson asked, catching his breath. "A token of the order," Holmes replied. "Each member carries one. This one bears a name, Eleanor Vance. She's our next lead." Watson frowned. "Lady Eleanor Vance? The society matron?" "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "The order's reach extends higher than I anticipated. Tomorrow we pay her a visit." The cab rattled toward Baker Street, the fog thinning as they left the docks behind. Holmes's mind was already racing ahead, piecing together the clues. The manuscript, the medallion, the thief's desperation. The Inkwell's mystery was deepening, but Holmes was in his element. The trail clear and the game afoot. Back at 221B. Holmes spread the stolen parchment on his desk, its cryptic symbols illuminated by candlelight. Watson, exhausted but intrigued, watched as Holmes traced the lines with a pencil. "This cipher is more complex than the first," Holmes said, his voice low with concentration. "But it confirms the ritual's purpose to awaken something tied to the Inkwell. Whether it's a genuine phenomenon or an elaborate ruse remains to be seen." He opened the brass medallion, revealing a tiny compartment containing a folded slip of paper. Unfurling it, he found a list of names order. Members, presumably. Lady Eleanor Vance's name was at the top, underlined twice. "She's not just a member," Holmes murmured. "She's a leader." Watson leaned forward. "What's our next move?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "We call on Lady Vance, but first we need leverage. This ledger," he tapped the parchment, "and the medallion will ensure she talks." The night stretched on, the fog pressing against the windows of Baker Street. Holmes worked tirelessly, decoding fragments of the cipher, while Watson penned notes of their adventure. The inkwell sat on the mantel, its carvings catching the firelight, silent but ever present. The trail of the saffron veil was clearer now, but the danger was far from over. Lady Vance awaited, and with her, the next piece of the riddle. Chapter 5. The Lady's Secret. The fog clung to the cobblestones of London, like a shroud as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson stepped from their H, rolling through the early morning mist toward the imposing silhouette of Lady Eleanor Vance's manor. The hansom cab's wheels rattled over the uneven streets, the horses' hooves clopping rhythmically. Holmes sat in silence, his sharp eyes scanning the passing buildings, while Watson, ever the observer of his friend's moods, sensed a quiet intensity beneath Holmes's calm exterior. The case of the haunted inkwell had taken a turn toward the extraordinary, and Watson knew Holmes was already piecing together the puzzle in his mind. "Are you certain this is wise, Holmes?" Watson asked, his voice low to avoid the driver's ears. "Confronting Lady Vance directly, I mean. She's no common criminal. She's a woman of influence with connections in high places." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Influence, Watson, is a currency that buys fear as often as it buys loyalty. If Lady Vance is involved with the Order of the Saffron Veil, her connections will not shield her from reason. I intend to appeal to her intellect and her self-preservation." The manor loomed ahead, a grand edifice of gray stone with ivy crawling up its walls, its tall windows glowing faintly against the dawn. The cab slowed, and Holmes paid the driver with a curt nod before leading the way up the wide steps to the heavy oak door. A sharp rap with his cane brought a butler, stiff and proper, who regarded them with thinly veiled suspicion. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson to see Lady Eleanor Vance, Holmes announced, his tone clipped and authoritative. "We have no appointment, but the matter is urgent." The butler hesitated, his eyes narrowing, but something in Holmes's steely gaze compelled him to step aside. "Wait in the drawing-room," he said. "I shall inform her ladyship." The drawing-room was a study in opulence, mahogany furniture, polished to a mirror sheen, crystal chandeliers catching the morning light, and walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Watson paced near a marble fireplace, his military bearing evident in his squared shoulders, while Holmes stood motionless by a window, his silhouette sharp against the pale light filtering through the drapes. "She may refuse to see us," Watson remarked, glancing at a gilt-framed painting of a severe woman in a high-collared gown. "We've no evidence against her, only suspicions." "Suspicions, Watson, are the seeds of evidence," Holmes replied without turning. Name was prominent in the order's ledger. A woman of her station does not associate with such a group without purpose. She will see us, if only to gauge what we know. The door opened, and Lady Eleanor Vance entered, a vision of composed elegance. She was tall, with raven hair swept into an intricate updo, her emerald gown accentuating the sharp intelligence in her hazel eyes. A faint smile played on her lips, but it did not reach her eyes, which assessed Holmes with a predator's caution. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," she said, her voice smooth as polished glass. "And Dr. Watson, I presume. To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Holmes turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "We are investigating a matter concerning an antique inkwell owned by a Miss Clara Hawthorne. It has come to our attention that you may have knowledge of its origins." Lady Vance's smile tightened, a flicker of unease crossing her face before she masked it with a laugh. "An inkwell? How peculiar. I'm afraid I know nothing of such trinkets. My interests lie in philanthropy and the arts, not dusty relics." Holmes stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "The inkwell bears the mark of the Order of the Saffron Veil, a society with which you are acquainted, according to certain documents in our possession." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Watson's hand drifted toward the revolver in his coat pocket, though he knew Holmes preferred to avoid such measures. Lady Vance's composure held, but her fingers tightened slightly around the fan she held. "You speak boldly, Mr. Holmes," she said, her tone cooling. "The Order of the Saffron Veil is a myth, a tale spun by superstitious minds. Surely you, a man of reason, do not credit such nonsense?" "I credit what the evidence suggests," Holmes replied, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "The inkwell, crafted in the 17th century by an alchemist named Cornelius Agrippa, is said to channel an otherworldly entity known as the scribe. The order believes it holds the key to forbidden knowledge. Your name appears in their records, Lady Vance. Denying it will not make it less true." Lady Vance's eyes flashed, but she maintained her poise, gesturing toward a pair of velvet upholstered chairs. "Please sit. Let us discuss this like civilized people." Watson remained standing, his instincts on edge, but Holmes accepted the invitation, settling into a chair with the ease of a man entirely in control. "Civilized discussion is my preference," Holmes said, "provided it is honest. Tell me, Lady Vance, what is the purpose of the Order's rituals?" She laughed. Again, a sound like breaking glass. "You persist in this fantasy, Mr. Holmes. Very well. Let us suppose, for argument's sake, that such a society exists. Their interest in an object like this inkwell would be purely academic, a curiosity, nothing more. The idea of summoning spirits is absurd, a relic of medieval superstition. And yet," Holmes countered, leaning forward, "the inkwell moves of its own accord, whispers in the dark, and glows under moonlight. These are not the behaviors of an academic curiosity." Lady Vance's fan snapped shut, her knuckles whitening. "You've seen it, then, Miss Hawthorne's inkwell, and you believe it to be what? Haunted?" "I believe it to be a mechanism of extraordinary design," Holmes said, his voice calm but unyielding. "But its purpose remains unclear. You, I suspect, know more than you claim." The room fell silent, the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner the only sound. Watson shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension coiling tighter. Lady Vance rose, gliding toward a sideboard where a decanter of sherry gleamed in the light. "A drink, gentlemen," she offered, her tone deceptively light. "No, thank you," Holmes replied, his eyes tracking her every movement. "I prefer to keep my faculties sharp." She poured herself a glass, her movements deliberate, as if buying time. "You are a persistent man, Mr. Holmes, but you are chasing shadows. If this inkwell is as remarkable as you say, perhaps it is simply a clever toy designed to amuse or frighten. Alchemists were known for their theatrics. Perhaps, Holmes allowed, rising to his feet. But theatrics do not account for the order's interest, nor for the ciphered manuscript hidden within the inkwell's compartment, a manuscript that speaks of a ritual to awaken the scribe. A ritual I believe you are familiar with. Lady Vance's glass paused at her lips, her eyes narrowing. You are well informed, Mr. Holmes, but you overreach. Even if such a manuscript exists, it is likely a forgery meant to entice the gullible. I am a woman of science and reason, not a dabbler in the occult. Watson, unable to contain himself, stepped forward. Then why does your name appear in the Order's ledger, madam? And why did masked men attack us in the East End when we pursued this very manuscript? Lady Vance's gaze flicked to Watson, her expression cool, but her eyes betraying a flicker of alarm. You were attacked? How dreadful! London is full of ruffians, Dr. Watson. I assure you, I have no connection to such violence. Holmes's smile was razor-thin. Your assurances are noted, Lady Vance, but the evidence suggests otherwise. The Order's ledger lists you as a benefactor, and the manuscript fragment points to a ritual site, an abandoned chapel in Whitechapel. I intend to visit it. Would you care to join us? Her composure cracked for a moment, her lips parting in surprise before she recovered. You are mistaken, Mr. Holmes. I have no business in Whitechapel, but you are free to chase your ghosts. I wish you luck. The lights in the room flickered suddenly, the chandeliers dimming as a low hum filled the air. Watson's hand went to his revolver, his eyes darting to the windows, where the fog seemed to press closer. A faint, unearthly whisper seemed to emanate from nowhere, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. Good heavens! Watson muttered, his heart pounding. What was that? Holmes remained unfazed, his eyes locked on Lady Vance. A curious phenomenon, he said dryly. Perhaps the manor has its own secrets. Lady Vance set her glass down with a sharp clink, her face pale but her voice steady. An electrical fault, nothing more. This old house is prone to such quirks. You mustn't let your imagination run wild, Dr. Watson. Holmes stepped toward the sideboard, his movements deliberate. Imagination, Lady Vance, is the spark of discovery. Allow me to inspect your library. I suspect it contains materials relevant to our inquiry. Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, gesturing toward a door at the far end of the room. My library is open to you, Mr. Holmes, but you'll find nothing but novels and histories. I am no alchemist. The library was a cavernous room lined with towering bookshelves, the air thick with the scent of leather and old paper. Watson's unease lingered, the memory of the whisper gnawing at him, but Holmes moved with purpose, his fingers trailing along the spines of ancient tomes. He paused at a locked glass cabinet, his eyes narrowing at the titles within. De Occulta Philosophia, The Key of Solomon, The Hermetic Arcanum. Novels and histories, you say? Holmes murmured, his tone laced with irony. He produced a small tool from his pocket and, with a deft movement, picked the lock. Watson's jaw tightened. He disapproved of such methods, but he knew Holmes's ethics bent in service of the truth. Inside the cabinet, Holmes found a slim, leather-bound volume with no title, its pages yellowed with age. He opened it, his eyes scanning the text with lightning speed. A treatise on alchemical vessels, he said, his voice low. This mentions the Inkwell explicitly, Lady Vance. It describes a mechanism designed to house the essence of the Tinde. Scribe, you claimed no knowledge of such matters. Lady Vance, who had followed them into the library, folded her arms, her expression icy. That book is a curiosity, nothing more. My late husband collected such oddities. I've never read it. Holmes closed the book with a snap, his eyes never leaving hers. Then you will not object if I borrow it for further study. Her lips thinned, but she nodded. Take it. It will prove nothing. As Holmes tucked the book into his coat, the lights flickered again, plunging the library into darkness. Watson's hand closed around his revolver, his pulse racing as the whisper returned, louder now, a sibilant chant that seemed to come from the walls themselves. A cold draft swept through the room, and in the dim moonlight filtering through the windows, Watson glimpsed a shadowy figure, a tall, cloaked shape with glowing eyes, standing in the corner. Holmes. Watson hissed, drawing his weapon. Holmes's hand shot out, gripping Watson's wrist. "Steady, Watson," he said, his voice calm as iron. "It's a trick, a projection, nothing more." The lights surged back to life, and the figure vanished. Lady Vance stood frozen, her face a mask of shock, or perhaps feigned shock. What in God's name was that? She demanded. "A parlor trick," Holmes said, his tone dismissive. "Mirrors and phosphorescent paint, I suspect. Someone wishes to frighten us, or to lend credence to the Inkwell's myth. I wonder who." Watson lowered his revolver, his heart still pounding. "You're certain it's not supernatural?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with amusement. "My dear Watson, the only spirits here are those in Lady Vance's decanter. But the timing is convenient, is it not?" He turned to Lady Vance, his expression cold. "Someone knew we were here. Someone with access to this house." Lady Vance's face hardened. "You accuse me of staging this? I was with you the entire time." "Indeed," Holmes said, his voice soft but dangerous. "Yet the order has eyes everywhere. We shall take our leave, Lady Vance, but rest assured I will uncover the truth." As they stepped back into the drawing-room, Holmes paused by a large oak desk, his eyes catching on a faint irregularity in the wood. With a swift movement, he pressed a hidden catch, revealing a concealed drawer. Inside lay a folded map, its edges worn but its markings clear, a detailed plan of an abandoned chapel in Whitechapel, annotated with symbols matching those on Clara. Hawthorne's Inkwell. Holmes held up the map, his gaze piercing Lady Vance. A curious place for a philanthropist to keep a map of a derelict chapel, don't you think? Lady Vance's face was a mask of fury, but she said nothing. Watson, still shaken by the apparition, followed Holmes out of the manor, the map and the alchemical treatise tucked safely inside Holmes's coat. The fog had thickened, swallowing the street lights, and as their cab rattled back toward Baker Street, Watson could not shake the feeling that they had stirred a hornet's nest. "Holmes," he said quietly, "that figure in the library, you're certain it was a trick?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light of the cab. "Certainty is the enemy of discovery, Watson, but I am confident. The inkwell, the whispers, the apparition, all are parts of a meticulously crafted illusion. The Order of the Saffron Veil seeks to manipulate belief, and belief is a powerful weapon. But we shall disarm it." Watson nodded, though his unease lingered. The map in Holmes's pocket, pointed to the next stage of their investigation, and though the ghostly scribe had been exposed as a fraud, the danger felt all too real. As the cab rolled on through the fog, Watson braced himself for what lay ahead, knowing that with Holmes at his side, no mystery was too great to unravel. Chapter 6. The chapel's echoes. The fog clung to London like a shroud as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson made their way through the city's outskirts, the rhythmic clatter of their hansom cab muffled by the damp air. The address gleaned from Lady Vance's hidden map led them to an abandoned chapel on the edge of Blackheath, its silhouette barely discernible against the moonless sky. Holmes sat in silence, his sharp eyes scanning the passing streets, while Watson clutched his revolver, the weight of it a small comfort against the unease that had settled in his chest since their encounter at Vance's manor. Holmes, Watson ventured, breaking the quiet, "Do you truly believe this chapel holds the key to the Inkwell's mystery? Or are we chasing shadows conjured by a clever fraud?" Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile, though his gaze remained fixed on the window. "Shadows, Watson, are cast by something tangible. The Inkwell's phenomena, its whispers, its movement, suggest a mechanism, but the Order's obsession hints at a deeper purpose. This chapel may reveal whether we're dealing with a conjurer's trick or something less easily explained." The cab slowed, and the driver's voice called out, hesitant, "This is as far as I go, sirs. That old chapel ain't no place for decent folk, not at this hour." Holmes tossed him a coin, and they stepped into the chill night, the cab retreating into the fog. Before them loomed the chapel, its spire broken like a snapped bone, its stone facade crumbling under the weight of neglect. Ivy snaked over the walls, and the stained glass windows, cracked and darkened, glinted faintly under the starlight. Holmes approached the rusted iron gate, his gloved fingers testing the lock. It gave way with a groan, as if unused for decades. "Curious," he murmured. "A forgotten place, yet the gate is recently oiled." Watson followed, his boots crunching on the gravel path, every sound amplified in the eerie stillness. The chapel's wooden door hung ajar, its hinges sagging. Holmes pushed it open, revealing a cavernous interior lit only by slivers of light filtering through the broken windows. Dust motes danced in the air, and the scent of mildew mingled with something sharper sulfur, perhaps, or old incense. The pews were overturned, hymnals scattered like fallen leaves. At the far end, an altar stood beneath a shattered crucifix, its surface etched with symbols that matched the arcane carvings on Clara Hawthorne's Inkwell. "Holmes, look at this," Watson said, pointing to the altar. The carvings were deep, precise, forming a spiral pattern that seemed to pulse in the dim light. Holmes knelt, his magnifying glass tracing the grooves. "These are not mere decorations," he said. "They're a cipher, or perhaps a map. The Inkwell's design is no coincidence. It's linked to this place." Watson's eyes darted to the shadows, half expecting another ambush like the one in Gilead's bookshop. "Do you think the Order still uses this chapel? It feels wrong somehow." Holmes stood, brushing dust from his coat. "Wrong, Watson. Your nerves are betraying you. But your instincts are not entirely misplaced. This place has been used recently. Note the candle wax on the floor, still soft." He pointed to a cluster of drippings near the altar, their edges unhardened. Someone was here within the last day. As they moved deeper into the chapel, Watson's foot struck something metallic, sending it skittering across the stone floor. He retrieved it, a tarnished brass key, its head shaped like a crescent moon. Holmes examined it, his expression unreadable. "This may prove useful," he said, slipping it into his pocket. "Let us see what secrets this altar conceals." They searched the altar's base, fingers probing for hidden mechanisms. Watson's hand brushed a loose stone, and with a click, a section of the floor slid aside, revealing a trapdoor. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Excellent, Watson. Your clumsiness has its uses." Watson grunted, but his pulse quickened as Holmes lifted the trapdoor, exposing a stone staircase descending into darkness. A gust of cold air rose from below, carrying a faint hum not mechanical, but almost alive like the drone of a distant hive. Watson hesitated, his revolver drawn. "Holmes, are you certain about this? That sound, it's unnatural." "Unnatural, perhaps, but not inexplicable," Holmes replied, lighting a small lantern from his satchel. Its glow illuminated the staircase, each step worn smooth by time or use. "Stay close, Watson. Whatever lies below, we'll face it together." The stairs descended deeper than Watson expected, the walls narrowing until they brushed his shoulders. The hum grew louder, resonating in his chest, and the air turned heavy, tinged with a metallic tang. At the bottom, they emerged into a subterranean chamber, its vaulted ceiling supported by pillars carved with the same arcane symbols. A stone table stood at the center, surrounded by rusted candelabras, their candles long burned to stubs. On the table lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. Holmes approached the table, his lantern casting long shadows. He opened the journal, revealing cramped handwriting interspersed with diagrams of the Inkwell and celestial charts. "This is the work of the alchemist Lady Vance mentioned," Holmes said, scanning the text. "A man named Cornelius Agrippa, not the historical figure, but a 17th-century pretender. He believed the Inkwell could bind a spirit, what he calls the scribe, to serve its master." Watson peered over Holmes's shoulder, struggling to make sense of the dense script. "Bind a spirit? That's madness, Holmes. Surely this is just the ravings of a fanatic." "Madness, perhaps, but methodical," Holmes replied. "Agrippa details experiments with the Inkwell chemicals to create luminescence, mechanisms to simulate movement. Yet he also describes failures. The spirit, he claims, resisted, causing the Inkwell to weep and whisper." Watson shivered, recalling the eerie sounds Clara had described. "Do you believe any of this, Holmes?" "A spirit trapped in an Inkwell?" Holmes closed the journal, his expression skeptical. "I believe in evidence, Watson. The Inkwell's phenomena can likely be explained by Agrippa's tricks, clockwork, chemicals, perhaps magnets. But the Order's faith in this scribe suggests they've seen something to sustain their belief. We must test the Inkwell itself, but first, we explore this chamber further." They searched the room, finding little beyond cobwebs and dust until Watson noticed a faint seam in the wall behind a pillar. He pressed it, and a panel slid open, revealing a niche containing a small wooden box. Inside was a vial of viscous, glowing liquid, its light pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Holmes held it to the lantern, his brow furrowing. "This is no ordinary phosphorescent," he said. "Its glow is too steady, too alive." "Holmes, are you suggesting—" Watson began. But a sudden noise cut him off, a low, grinding sound from above, like stone dragging on stone. They froze, listening as footsteps echoed in the chapel overhead. Holmes doused the lantern, plunging them into darkness save for the vial's eerie glow. "We have company," he whispered. "Stay silent." The footsteps grew closer, descending. The stairs. Watson gripped his revolver, his heart pounding as two figures emerged into the chamber, their faces hidden by hooded cloaks. One carried a lantern, its light revealing the saffron yellow lining of their garments, the mark of the Order of the Saffron Veil. "The journal is here," one said, his voice low and urgent. "Mordecai will have our heads if we return without it." Holmes signaled Watson to stay low, his own hand resting on the key in his pocket. The intruders approached the table, oblivious to the open panel or the vial in Holmes's grasp. As they reached for the journal, Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "Gentlemen, I believe you're trespassing." The men spun, one drawing a dagger, the other fumbling for a pistol. Watson sprang up, his revolver trained on them. "Drop your weapons," he barked. The men hesitated, then complied, their faces pale in the lantern's glow. Holmes stepped closer, holding the vial aloft. "Tell me," he said, "what does Professor Mordecai want with this chamber? And why is this journal so vital to him?" The man with the dagger sneered. "You're meddling in forces you can't comprehend, Holmes. The scribe will rise, and the Inkwell will open the way." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A charming delusion. But I suspect your scribe is a fiction, and this vial some clever chemical concoction is the source of your so-called miracles. Speak, or my friend here may lose his patience." The second man, younger and visibly shaken, stammered, "It's not a trick. The Inkwell, it moves, it speaks. Mordecai says it's the key to knowledge beyond mortal ken. The journal tells how to awaken it." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson, his expression unreadable. "Take them to the authorities, Watson. These fools are no threat, but their master may be. We'll keep the journal and the vial for now." Watson bound the men's wrists with cord from his satchel, leading them up the stairs as Holmes pocketed the journal and vial. The chapel was silent once more, but the hum lingered in Watson's ears, a reminder of the chamber's unsettling energy. As they emerged into the night, Holmes paused, staring at the Inkwell's symbols in his mind's eye. "The Inkwell's secret is mechanical, Watson," he said. "But this vial, it defies my current understanding. We must return to Baker Street and test it." The journey back was quiet, the fog thicker than before. Watson couldn't shake the feeling that the chapel had left its mark on him, its echoes lingering like a half-remembered dream. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, his mind already dissecting the next steps. "We'll analyze the vial's contents," he said as they reached 221B. "If it's a chemical trick, I'll uncover it. If it's something more, we'll face that too." In their rooms, Holmes set the vial on his desk, its glow casting strange shadows. He opened the journal, his fingers tracing Agrippa's words. "The scribe resists," he read aloud, "but the Inkwell's heart must be fed." Watson watched, uneasy, as Holmes prepared his chemistry set. The night stretched on, the Inkwell's mystery deepening, but Holmes's resolve was unshaken. The chapel's echoes had revealed much, yet the final truth remained just out of reach, waiting for the detective's relentless logic to unravel it. Chapter 7. The clockwork enigma. The fog had thickened over Baker Street. cloaking the gaslights in a hazy shroud as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John. Watson sat in the dimly lit sitting room of 221B, the antique Inkwell, its arcane carvings catching. The flicker of the hearth rested on the table before them. Clara Hawthorne's urgent visit the previous night had left them with a puzzle that stirred Holmes's insatiable curiosity, though he remained steadfastly skeptical of her claims of supernatural whispers and ghostly movements. Watson, ever the pragmatist tempered by an open mind, watched as Holmes turned the inkwell over in his hands, his long fingers tracing the intricate designs etched into its obsidian surface. "It's a curious piece, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low and focused. "The craftsmanship is exquisite, yet the purpose of these symbols eludes me. They are not merely decorative, but I suspect a more prosaic explanation than Miss Hawthorne's tales of hauntings." Watson leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "You think it's a trick, then? Some sort of mechanical contrivance?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Precisely. The human mind is quick to conjure specters when faced with the inexplicable, but I have yet to encounter a mystery that cannot be unraveled by logic and observation. Let us test this inkwell's supposed powers." He rose abruptly, carrying the inkwell to his cluttered workbench, where an array of tools, tweezers, magnifying lenses, and a small jeweler's hammer awaited. Watson followed, settling into a chair to observe as Holmes began his examination. The room was quiet save for the occasional crackle of the fire and the distant clatter of a hansom cab on the street below. Holmes adjusted the gas lamp, casting a sharp beam of light onto the inkwell, and peered through his magnifying glass. The carvings were indeed peculiar, a blend of geometric patterns and symbols that hinted at alchemical origins. Watson, though no expert in such matters, recognized a few from his readings: a crescent moon, a serpent devouring its tail, and a cluster of stars arranged in a constellation unfamiliar to him. Holmes's fingers paused over a seam so fine it was nearly invisible, running along the base of the inkwell. "Aha," he said softly, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovery. "Watson, fetch me the smallest screwdriver from the drawer." Watson complied, handing over the tool. Holmes inserted it into the seam with surgical precision, and with a faint click, a panel sprang open, revealing a hidden compartment within the inkwell's base. Inside lay a tightly rolled scrap of parchment, no larger than a matchstick. Holmes extracted it with tweezers and unrolled it under the lamp. The parchment bore a series of cryptic symbols, not unlike those on the inkwell, accompanied by a faint metallic sheen. A cipher, perhaps, Holmes mused. Or instructions. "This inkwell is more than a decorative trinket, it's a puzzle box." Watson leaned closer, squinting at the tiny script. Could it be connected to the manuscript fragment we found yesterday? The one mentioning the order of the saffron veil? Holmes nodded, his mind already racing ahead. Quite possibly. The order's interest in this object suggests it holds a key to their secrets, though whether those secrets are mystical or merely criminal remains to be seen. I shall need time to study this further. He set the parchment aside and returned to the inkwell, probing its interior with a fine probe. A soft whirring sound emanated from within, barely audible but unmistakable. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Listen, Watson. Do you hear it?" Watson tilted his head, catching the faint hum. "A mechanism of some sort, indeed." Holmes adjusted the lamp again, illuminating a series of tiny gears and springs nestled within the Inkwell's hollow core. A clockwork device ingeniously concealed. This explains the movement Miss Hawthorne described. The whispers, however, are another matter. He tapped the inkwell gently, and a low, eerie sound, like a whispered chant, filled the room. Watson started, his hand instinctively moving to his revolver, though he quickly relaxed, chiding himself for his nerves. Holmes, unfazed, tilted the inkwell, and the sound ceased. "A clever trick," he said, his tone almost admiring. A thin membrane within the chamber vibrates when air is forced through it, likely triggered by the movement of the gears. The effect is not unlike a phonograph, though far cruder. But there's more here than meets the eye. He continued his dissection, removing a small brass plate to reveal a compartment containing a trace of luminescent powder. It glowed faintly under the lamplight, casting an ethereal green hue across the table. Watson's breath caught. "Good. Lord, Holmes, what is that?" Holmes dipped a fingertip into the powder and held it to the light, sniffing it cautiously. "A chemical compound, likely a phosphorescent substance. It's harmless, I suspect, but designed to impress the superstitious. The glow Miss Hawthorne observed under moonlight is no supernatural phenomenon, it's chemistry." Watson shook his head, marveling at the ingenuity. "So the inkwell is a hoax? A parlor trick to frighten or deceive?" "Not entirely," Holmes replied, his tone cautious. "The craftsmanship suggests a purpose beyond mere trickery. The Order of the Saffron Veil, if our deductions about the manuscript are correct, believes this inkwell holds significant power. Whether that power is real or imagined, they are willing to go to great lengths to reclaim it." As if on cue, a sharp rap at the door interrupted their discussion. Mrs. Hudson's voice called up the stairs, "Mr. Holmes, a telegram for you." Holmes strode to the door, retrieving the message from Mrs. Hudson. He tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents. Swiftly, his expression darkened. "It's from Miss Hawthorne," he said, passing the telegram to Watson. "Her lodgings were nearly broken into an hour ago. The intruder fled when her neighbor raised the alarm, but she's certain it was no ordinary thief." Watson read the telegram aloud. "Dear Mr. Holmes, I am shaken but unharmed. Someone attempted to force my door tonight. I fear it is connected to the inkwell. Please advise. Clara." Holmes paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "The order is growing bold. They know the inkwell is here, or they suspect Miss Hawthorne still possesses it. We must act quickly." He returned to the workbench, reassembling the inkwell with deft movements. "The mechanism is a marvel, Watson, but it's incomplete. The chemical residue and the cipher suggest there's more to this device than we've uncovered. I propose a trap to draw out our adversaries." Watson raised an eyebrow. "A trap? Here at Baker Street?" "Precisely," Holmes said, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "We shall let it be known that the inkwell remains in Miss Hawthorne's possession, but under our protection. The Order will not resist the bait. I'll arrange for Lestrade to post a discreet watch on her lodgings while we prepare a little surprise here." He moved to his desk, scribbling a note to Inspector Lestrade at Scotland Yard. "We'll need a few items, some tripwires, a bell, and perhaps a net. Simple but effective. The Order's operatives are likely amateurs, driven by fanaticism rather than skill. They'll walk into our hands." Watson, accustomed to Holmes's penchant for theatrical solutions, nodded. And what of the Inkwell itself? If the order is so desperate to reclaim it, there must be more to its purpose. Holmes paused, his gaze fixed on the Inkwell. That, Watson, is the heart of the enigma. The manuscript fragments we've recovered speak of a ritual, a scribe to be awakened. The clockwork and chemicals suggest a deception, but the orders, persistence, hints at a deeper truth. We shall uncover it in time. The next few hours were a flurry of activity. Holmes dispatched his note to Lestrade, who arrived promptly with 2 constables and a skeptical expression. This Inkwell business sounds like a lot of nonsense, Holmes, he grumbled. But if you say there's trouble brewing, I'll trust you. Holmes outlined his plan. Clara would return to her lodgings, accompanied by one of Lestrade's men posing as a cousin, while Holmes and Watson would remain at Baker Street with the Inkwell. A carefully planted rumor spread through the irregulars Holmes's network of street urchins would suggest that Clara had reclaimed the Inkwell from Holmes. The trap was set. As night fell, Baker Street grew silent, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. Holmes rigged the sitting room with tripwires connected to a small bell concealed beneath a rug. A fishing net, procured from a nearby shop, hung above the door, ready to drop at the pull of a cord. Watson, armed with his revolver, took up position by the window, while Holmes sat by the hearth. The Inkwell prominently displayed on the table. The hours ticked by, marked only by the steady drip of a leak in the corner of the room. Watson's eyelids grew heavy, but Holmes remained alert, his eyes fixed on the Inkwell as if willing it to reveal its secrets. At 2:30, a faint creak on the stairs snapped them both to attention. Holmes motioned for silence, his hand hovering over the cord that controlled the net. The door handle turned slowly, and a shadowy figure slipped into the room, cloaked in black. The intruder moved toward the Inkwell, unaware of the tripwire at their feet. A bell jingled sharply, and Holmes yanked the cord. The net fell, entangling the figure, who let out a muffled cry. Watson sprang forward, pinning the intruder to the floor as Holmes lit a lamp. The figure was a wiry man in his 30s, his face partially obscured by a scarf. Holmes pulled it away, revealing a gaunt, pale face with wild eyes. "Who are you?" Holmes demanded, his voice cold. The man struggled briefly, then sagged in defeat. "My name's unimportant," he rasped. "The Order will have the Inkwell. You can't stop us." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The Order of the Saffron Veil, I presume. Tell me, what makes this trinket so valuable to your masters?" The man clamped his lips shut, but Holmes leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You will talk, or you'll find yourself in Lestrade's cells before dawn. What is the Inkwell's purpose?" The man's resolve wavered under Holmes's piercing gaze. It's the key," he stammered. "The scribe. It can summon the scribe, knowledge beyond mortal ken. The Order seeks it, and they'll kill to protect it." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. "A scribe, you say? And this ritual, where is it to take place?" The man shook his head, trembling. "I don't know. Only the professor knows. Mordecai. He's the one you want." Holmes straightened, his expression unreadable. "Take him to Lestrade," he instructed Watson. "We have what we need for now." As Watson escorted the intruder to the waiting constables, Holmes returned to the Inkwell, his mind racing. The name Mordecai was new, a threat to tug in this ever-deepening mystery. He picked up the inkwell, turning it over in his hands once more. The faint glow of the chemical residue pulsed faintly, as if mocking his efforts to unravel its secrets. Watson returned, brushing his hands together. "Well, Holmes, that was neatly done. But what now? This Mordecai fellow sounds like trouble." Holmes set the inkwell down, his eyes alight with determination. "We have a name, Watson, and a purpose, however fanciful it may seem. The Order believes this inkwell can summon some spectral entity, a scribe, to grant forbidden knowledge. Whether it's nonsense or not, they are willing to risk everything for it. Our next move is to find Professor Mordecai." He crossed to his desk, pulling out a map of London and its surrounding counties. The Order's operations suggest a base outside the city, somewhere remote, where rituals can be conducted in secret. We'll start with the ledger we recovered from the warehouse. It may hold clues to Mordecai's whereabouts." Watson nodded, though his expression betrayed a flicker of unease. "And the inkwell? Do you truly believe it's just a mechanical trick?" Holmes hesitated, his gaze drifting to the inkwell. "The mechanism explains much, Watson, but not all. The chemical residue, the cipher, the Order's desperation, these suggest a deeper design. We shall confront Mordecai and put an end to this charade." As dawn broke over Baker Street, casting pale light through the fog, Holmes and Watson prepared for the next stage of their investigation. The inkwell, now stripped of its mystique but heavy with unanswered questions, sat silently on the table. The trap had worked, but the enigma remained, pulling them deeper into a web of secrets and shadows. The journey to Mordecai's estate would be their next challenge, and Holmes knew the answers lay there, waiting to be uncovered by his relentless logic. For now, the clockwork enigma of the inkwell had yielded its first secrets, but the greater mystery of the Order of the Saffron Veil loomed larger than ever. Chapter 8. The Order's Gambit. The fog clung to the streets of London like a conspirator, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of night vendors as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson sat in their rooms at 221B Baker Street. The inkwell, its arcane carvings catching the flicker of the gaslight, rested on the table before them, an enigma now partially unraveled. Holmes's discovery of its clockwork mechanism had stripped away much of its mystique, yet the glowing chemical residue within defied explanation, and the threat of the Order of the Saffron Veil loomed larger than ever. Clara Hawthorne's urgent telegram, warning of an attempted break-in at her home, had set Holmes's mind ablaze with calculations, and now, as the clock struck 9:30, he was ready to act. Watson, seated in his armchair, puffed on his pipe, his brow furrowed. "Holmes, do you truly believe this Order will risk exposing themselves again so soon? Surely they know we're on to them." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that peculiar intensity that signaled his mind was racing. "My dear Watson, desperation makes fools of even the most cautious. The Order believes this inkwell holds the key to some forbidden knowledge, a spectral scribe. If Clara's account is to be believed, they will not hesitate to strike again, especially now that they suspect we possess it. But we shall turn their eagerness to our advantage." He rose, his lean frame casting a shadow across the cluttered room, and began pacing with measured steps. "The break-in attempt at Clara's home suggests they are either reckless or poorly informed. Either way, it provides us an opportunity. We shall set a trap here at Baker Street and lure them into revealing themselves. But we must act swiftly. Watson leaned forward, his military instincts piqued. A trap? How do you propose to manage that without endangering Clara or ourselves? Holmes paused, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Simplicity is our ally. We shall let it be known discreetly, through channels the Order likely monitors, that the Inkwell remains here, unguarded tonight. Mrs. Hudson will be instructed to retire early, and we shall create the appearance of an empty house. You and I, Watson, will conceal ourselves and wait. When they come, we shall have them." Watson nodded, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. "And if they send more than a lone thief?" "Those thugs in the bookshop were no amateurs." "Then we shall be prepared," Holmes replied, crossing to a locked cabinet in the corner. He withdrew a small revolver and a box of cartridges, handing them to Watson with a faint smile. "Your service in Afghanistan has made you a crack shot, has it not? I trust you'll find this sufficient." Watson took the weapon, checking its weight with a practiced hand. "It'll do, Holmes, but I hope it doesn't come to that." "As do I," Holmes said, though his tone suggested he relished the prospect of a confrontation. "Now, let us set the stage." The plan was set in motion with the precision of a Swiss watch. Holmes dispatched a street urchin from the Baker Street irregulars to spread a rumor in certain unsavory taverns that 221B would be unoccupied that night. The Inkwell left carelessly on the sitting-room table. Mrs. Hudson, ever obliging despite her grumbles about Mr. Holmes's dangerous games, agreed to retire to her quarters and keep her lamp dim. Holmes and Watson, meanwhile, arranged the sitting-room to appear deserted, leaving the Inkwell in plain view beneath a single lit candle, its faint glow casting eerie shadows across the carved symbols. Holmes chose their hiding place with care. A narrow alcove behind a heavy curtain near the fireplace, where they could observe the room without being seen. Watson, revolver in hand, crouched beside him, his breath steady but his heart pounding with anticipation. The hours crept by, marked only by the soft ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional creak of the house settling. Outside, the fog thickened, muffling the world beyond the window. At 1:15, a faint scrape at the front door broke the silence. Watson tensed, his grip tightening on the revolver, but Holmes's hand on his arm signaled patience. The door creaked open, and soft footsteps padded up the stairs, deliberate and cautious. A shadow moved across the threshold of the sitting-room, pausing as if to survey the scene. The candlelight revealed a figure cloaked in black, their face obscured by a scarf. But the glint of a knife in their hand was unmistakable. The intruder approached the table, their movements slow and deliberate, as if expecting a trap. They reached for the Inkwell, fingers hovering above its surface, when Holmes sprang into action. With a swift motion, he flung the curtain aside and leveled his own revolver at the figure. "I suggest you stand very still," he said, his voice cold and commanding. The intruder froze, but before Watson could move to secure them, a second figure burst through the doorway, wielding a cudgel. Watson reacted instinctively, firing a warning shot into the ceiling. The second figure ducked, cursing, and lunged toward Holmes. A brief scuffle ensued, with Holmes sidestepping the cudgel and delivering a precise blow to the man's wrist, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. Watson tackled the second intruder, pinning him to the ground, while Holmes secured the first, twisting their arm behind their back and relieving them of the knife. "Light the lamp, Watson." Holmes ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. Watson complied, and the room was bathed in a warm glow, revealing their captives. 2 men, one slight and wiry, the other broad and muscular, both wearing the saffron-colored sashes of the order beneath their cloaks. "Well, gentlemen," Holmes said, his tone almost conversational, "you've saved us the trouble of tracking you down. Now, shall we discuss your employer's interest in this Inkwell?" The wiry man spat, his eyes blazing with defiance. "You know nothing, Holmes. The order will have what's theirs." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Indeed? Then perhaps you'll enlighten us. Who sent you, and what precisely do you hope to achieve with this trinket?" The larger man, still pinned beneath Watson's knee, growled but said nothing. Holmes knelt beside him, his gaze piercing. "Silence will not serve you. I have deduced the nature of your order's delusion, a spectral scribe, a myth spun by a 17th-century charlatan. But myths do not justify burglary. Speak, or I shall ensure Scotland Yard takes an interest in your activities." The wiry man sneered. "You think you've won, Holmes. The professor will see to you. The Inkwell's power is real, and we'll have it, with or without you." Holmes's eyes narrowed at the mention of the professor. "Professor Mordecai, I presume. Your leader has been careless to let his name slip through your lips. Tell me where he is, and I may be inclined to leniency." The man clamped his mouth shut, but the larger one, perhaps sensing the futility of resistance, muttered, "He's at Blackthorn Hall, in the countryside, but you'll never get near him. He's got eyes everywhere." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson, a silent acknowledgment of their next move. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said, binding the men's wrists with cord from his desk. "Watson, summon Lestrade. These gentlemen will enjoy the hospitality of Scotland Yard, while we pay a visit to Blackthorn Hall." Inspector Lestrade arrived within the hour, his usual grumbling tempered by grudging admiration for Holmes's efficiency. The 2 intruders were carted off to a cell, their protests echoing down Baker Street. Holmes, meanwhile, was already poring over a map of the countryside, his finger tracing a route to Blackthorn Hall, a secluded estate some 20 miles outside London. Watson, nursing a bruised knuckle from the scuffle, watched his friend with a mixture of exhaustion and awe. "Holmes," he said, "do you truly believe this Professor Mordecai is the mastermind behind all this? And what of the Inkwells? Glow? You've explained the whispers and movement, but that chemical residue is a puzzle yet to be solved," Holmes interrupted, his tone brisk. "The glow may be a simple phosphorescent compound, or it may be something more exotic. But I suspect Mordecai's interest lies not in science but in superstition. He believes, as the order does, that the Inkwell can summon this spectral scribe. Our task is to confront him before he can rally his followers for another attempt." Watson frowned. "And if he's as dangerous as these men suggest, Blackthorn Hall could be a fortress." "Then we shall approach it as one," Holmes replied, folding the map with a decisive snap. "We leave at dawn. Pack lightly, Watson, but bring your revolver. I suspect we shall need it." The journey to Blackthorn Hall was a study in contrasts. The rolling green hills of the countryside, bathed in the pale light of early morning, stood in stark opposition to the tension that gripped Holmes and Watson. They traveled by hired carriage, the driver a taciturn man who asked no questions and accepted Holmes's generous tip with a grunt. As the spires of Blackthorn Hall came into view, sprawling, ivy-clad manor that seemed to crouch among the trees like a predator lying in wait. Watson felt a chill that had little to do with the morning air. Holmes, ever observant, noted the estate's defenses: high walls topped with iron spikes, a gate guarded by 2 men in saffron sashes, and a faint plume of smoke rising from a chimney, suggesting activity within. "They're expecting trouble," he murmured. "But not from us, not yet." Their approach was calculated. Holmes had donned the guise of a scholarly antiquarian, complete with spectacles and a false beard, while Watson posed as his assistant, carrying a satchel stuffed with forged documents. They presented themselves at the gate, claiming to have urgent business with Professor Mordecai regarding a rare manuscript. The guards, suspicious but swayed by Holmes's convincing performance, allowed them entry after a cursory search. Inside, Blackthorn Hall was a labyrinth of dark wood paneling and flickering torches, its air heavy with the scent of old books and something less tangible, fear, perhaps, or anticipation. A servant led them to a cavernous study where Professor Mordecai awaited. He was a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes and a mane of white hair, his presence commanding yet unsettling. A saffron robe hung loosely over his frame, and his fingers, stained with ink, toyed with a quill as he regarded his visitors. "Mr. Holmes," Mordecai said, his voice smooth and cold, "I had not expected you to be so bold as to walk into my home. Your reputation precedes you." Holmes removed his spectacles, abandoning the pretense. "And yours, Professor, is rapidly becoming known to me. Your order's obsession with this Inkwell has led you to reckless acts. I am here to put an end to it." Mordecai's smile was thin, almost serpentine. "Reckless? You misunderstand, Mr. Holmes. The Inkwell is no mere trinket. It is a conduit, a vessel for knowledge beyond mortal ken. The spectral scribe is no myth, it is a force, and I intend to wield it." Watson, standing slightly behind Holmes, felt a surge of indignation. "You're mad," he blurted. "You've terrorized an innocent woman and sent thugs to break into our home, all for a fairy tale." Mordecai's eyes flicked to Watson, amused. "Dr. Watson, your skepticism is charming, but misplaced. The Inkwell's power is real, as you will soon see. My followers are preparing a ritual even now, and with or without your interference, the scribe will awaken." Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Your ritual is a fraud, Professor. The Inkwell's effects are mechanical, its glow a chemical trick. Your followers are pawns in a delusion you've crafted to serve your own ends. Tell me, what do you seek power? Wealth? Or merely the thrill of playing God?" Mordecai's composure faltered, a flicker of anger crossing his face. "You know nothing of my purpose, Holmes. But you will learn. Guards!" At his call, 4 men in saffron sashes burst into the room, armed with knives and cudgels. Holmes, anticipating the move, had already drawn his revolver, while Watson raised his own. "Stand down," Holmes commanded, his voice steady. "Your master's game is over." The guards hesitated, their eyes darting between Holmes and Mordecai. The professor's confidence wavered, and in that moment of uncertainty, Holmes seized the advantage. "Watson, the door." Watson fired a shot into the air, causing the guards to flinch, and the 2 men bolted for the exit. A chaotic pursuit followed, with Holmes and Watson weaving through the manor's corridors, dodging blows and overturning furniture to slow their pursuers. They reached the courtyard where the carriage waited and scrambled aboard as the driver whipped the horses into motion. As Blackthorn Hall receded into the distance, Watson caught his breath, his heart pounding. Holmes, that was too close. Mordecai is unhinged. He truly believes in this spectral scribe. Holmes, removing his false beard, nodded grimly. He is a fanatic, Watson, and fanatics are dangerous. But we have the advantage now. The ledger we stole from the orders. Meeting lists their members and their plans. Mordecai's ritual is set for tomorrow night, and I intend to be there to stop it. Watson glanced at the satchel, where the ledger lay alongside the inkwell, which they had brought as bait. And the inkwell? What if there's more to it than your clockwork theory? Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. Then we shall uncover the truth, Watson. But first, we return to London. We have a ritual to disrupt. Back at Baker Street, Holmes pored over the ledger, its pages filled with cryptic notes and names, many of them prominent figures in London scholarly circles. The ritual, it seemed, was to take place in an abandoned warehouse near the Thames, a location the order had used before. Holmes's mind raced as he pieced together the details: the inkwell, the manuscript fragments, the chemical residue, and Mordecai's obsession with the spectral scribe. It was a puzzle of human greed and delusion, but the glowing residue nagged at him, a loose thread in an otherwise tidy solution. Watson, meanwhile, prepared for the confrontation, cleaning his revolver and packing a medical kit in case of trouble. Holmes, he said, pausing, do you think Mordecai's men will talk? The ones we caught tonight? Holmes shook his head. Unlikely. They are loyal, or at least frightened enough to hold their tongues. But their capture has bought us time. Mordecai will be forced to act quickly, and haste breeds mistakes. As the night deepened, Holmes lit a pipe and leaned back in his chair, the inkwell before him. Its faint glow seemed to pulse in the dim light, a silent challenge to his rational mind. Tomorrow, Watson, he said softly, we shall put an end to this charade. And perhaps, just perhaps, we shall uncover the final secret of the haunted Inkwell. The chapter closed with the two men in quiet resolve, the fog outside swirling like a curtain drawn across the stage of their next adventure. The order's gambit had been met, but the final move was yet to come. Chapter 9. The Spectral Confrontation. The fog clung to the countryside like a shroud as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson approached Professor Mordecai's estate, a sprawling manor nestled in the shadow of ancient oaks. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl punctuated the silence. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, noting the faint glow of lantern light seeping through the manor's tall, arched windows. The journey from London had been swift, driven by the urgency of the captured order member's confession. Mordecai, the reclusive scholar and mastermind of the Order of the Saffron Veil, was preparing a ritual to activate the haunted inkwell, and Holmes was determined to stop him before the night's end. Watson adjusted his overcoat, his breath visible in the chill. Holmes, do you truly believe Mordecai thinks this inkwell can summon some spectral scribe? It's madness. Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. Madness, Watson, is often a matter of perspective. Mordecai is no fool. He's a scholar of obscure lore, steeped in the delusions of alchemy and occultism. He may believe the inkwell holds power, or he may simply exploit the belief to control his followers. Either way, His actions threaten Clara Hawthorne and the stability of reason itself. We must proceed with utmost caution. They reached the estate's iron gates, which creaked open under Holmes's deft touch with a lockpick. The gravel path crunched beneath their boots as they moved toward the manor, its Gothic silhouette looming against the moonless sky. Holmes paused, his hand raised to signal silence. A faint chant, rhythmic and guttural, drifted from within the manor, accompanied by the acrid smell of burning herbs. Watson's hand instinctively went to the revolver in his pocket, but Holmes shook his head. "Steady, Watson. Our advantage lies in observation, not confrontation. At least not yet." They crept along the manor's perimeter, avoiding the flickering light of patrolling guards clad in dark cloaks emblazoned with the saffron veil symbol, a stylized quill encircled by flames. Holmes led Watson to a side entrance, a servant's door half hidden by ivy. With a few precise movements, he jimmied the lock, and they slipped inside. The interior was a labyrinth of shadowed corridors, lined with portraits of stern-faced scholars, and shelves groaning under the weight of ancient tomes. The chanting grew louder, emanating from a grand hall at the manor's heart. Holmes and Watson moved silently, their footsteps muffled by thick rugs. At the hall's entrance, they crouched behind a velvet curtain, peering through a gap. The scene before them was otherworldly. A circle of 12 robed figures stood around a stone altar, their faces obscured by hoods. At the center, Professor Mordecai, a tall, gaunt man with a hawkish nose and piercing eyes, held the inkwell aloft. Its carvings seemed to pulse with a sickly green light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A brazier burned nearby, releasing clouds of pungent smoke that swirled in unnatural patterns. The manuscript fragments, stolen from Clara and pieced together, lay spread across the altar, their ciphered text illuminated by candlelight. Mordecai's voice, low and commanding, rose above the chants. "Tonight, brothers and sisters, we awaken the scribe of eternity. The inkwell, forged by the alchemist's hand, will channel its power. Knowledge forbidden to mortals shall be ours." Watson whispered, "Holmes, that light, it's like what you saw at Baker Street. But how?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A chemical trick, Watson. Phosphorescent compounds, likely mixed with the ink residue we found. The smoke is suspicious, possibly a hallucinogen to enhance the illusion. Observe the mirrors." He pointed to polished silver panels discreetly positioned around the hall, reflecting the inkwell's glow to amplify its effect. "Mordecai is staging a spectacle, but we shall see through it." The ritual intensified, the chants rising to a fevered pitch. Mordecai poured a vial of viscous liquid into the inkwell, and the green glow flared, eliciting gasps from the robed figures. Watson gripped Holmes's arm. "Good Lord, it's as if the thing's alive." Holmes's expression remained impassive. "Patience, Watson. The moment to act approaches." As Mordecai raised a dagger over the inkwell, preparing to recite an incantation, Holmes sprang into action. He stepped from behind the curtain, his voice cutting through the din like a blade. "Professor Mordecai, your charade ends here." The chanting stopped abruptly. The robed figures turned, their faces a mix of shock and fury. Mordecai's eyes locked onto Holmes, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I expected you might interfere, but you are too late. The ritual is nearly complete." Holmes strode forward, undeterred. A ritual built on parlor tricks and gullibility. Your inkwell is a marvel of clockwork and chemistry, nothing more. The scribe of eternity is a myth, and your order is a collection of deluded fanatics. Mordecai's smile widened. Is it a myth, Holmes? Or have you simply failed to see beyond your narrow logic? He snapped his fingers, and the brazier flared, releasing a thick cloud of smoke that filled the hall. Watson coughed, his vision blurring as the air grew heavy with a cloying sweetness. Holmes! Watson gasped, clutching his revolver. This smoke, it's doing something to me. The room seemed to warp. Shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, and a towering figure appeared at the altar, a spectral scribe, its form translucent, its hands clutching a quill that dripped black ink. The robed figures fell to their knees, murmuring in awe. Watson's heart pounded, his rational mind wrestling with the vision before him. Holmes, however, stood firm, his eyes scanning the room. Watson, focus! The mirrors look at the angles. He pointed to the silver panels, which now reflected the scribe's image from a hidden projector concealed in the ceiling. Mordecai is using light and smoke to create this illusion. The gas is a mild hallucinogen, amplifying your fear. Breathe through your handkerchief. Watson followed Holmes's advice, pressing his handkerchief to his face. The scribe's image flickered, its edges less defined. Holmes moved swiftly, knocking over the brazier to disperse the smoke. The robed figures shouted in protest, but Holmes ignored them, advancing toward Mordecai. "You've orchestrated a clever deception," Holmes said, his voice steady. "The inkwell's glow comes from a phosphorescent compound, likely zinc sulfide mixed with a catalyst. The whispers and movement are clockwork, as I discovered, and this scribe, a projection enhanced by your gas to exploit the credulous." Mordecai's composure faltered, but he raised the dagger defiantly. "You underestimate the inkwell's true power, Holmes. The alchemist's work was no mere trick. The scribe exists, and it will serve us." Holmes lunged, seizing Mordecai's wrist before the dagger could descend. The two struggled, the inkwell teetering on the altar. Watson, his head clearing, aimed his revolver at the nearest robed figure, who froze. "Stay where you are," he barked, his military instincts kicking in. The hall erupted into chaos. Some order members fled, their robes billowing as they vanished into the manor's corridors. Others charged at Holmes, but he dispatched them with precise strikes, his knowledge of Baritsu proving invaluable. Watson fired a warning shot into Vandu, the ceiling, scattering the remaining cultists. Mordecai broke free, grabbing the inkwell and bolting toward a side door. Holmes pursued, with Watson close behind. They followed him through a maze of passages, emerging into a moonlit courtyard where Mordecai stood. Panting, the inkwell clutched to his chest. "Give it up, Mordecai," Holmes said, his voice calm, but unyielding. "Your ritual is a failure. The scribe is a fabrication, and your order is finished." Mordecai's eyes blazed with desperation. "You cannot stop the inevitable, Holmes. The inkwell's power is real, whether you believe it or not." He raised the inkwell, as if to smash it, but Holmes tackled him to the ground, wresting the artifact free. The glow faded, revealing the inkwell as nothing more than an ornate vessel, its carvings dull in the moonlight. Mordecai slumped, defeated, as Watson bound his hands with a cord from his coat. The authorities arrived soon after, summoned by a telegram Holmes had sent before their departure from London. Mordecai was taken into custody, muttering about ancient secrets and betrayed destinies. The remaining order members were rounded up, their ledger providing ample evidence of their activities. As dawn broke over the estate, Holmes and Watson stood in the courtyard, the inkwell safely in Holmes's satchel. Watson shook his head, still processing the night's events. Holmes, for a moment, I thought that scribe was real. The gas, the mirrors, it was so convincing. Holmes nodded, his expression thoughtful. The human mind is susceptible to suggestion, Watson. Mordecai exploited that, using science to mimic the supernatural. But reason prevails, as it always must. They returned to London, the inkwell secured for Clara's eventual reclamation. The manor, now silent, stood as a testament to the folly of those who sought power through illusion. The case was nearly closed, but Holmes's mind already turned to the final task, ensuring Clara's safety and dispelling the last shadows of the Order's influence. Chapter 10. The Final Quill. Fog had settled over London like a shroud as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson made their way back to 221B Baker Street, the familiar clatter of their hansom cab's wheels muffled by the damp cobblestones. The inkwell, now safely tucked in Holmes's greatcoat pocket, seemed an unassuming trinket, stripped of the eerie mystique that had surrounded it only days before. Clara Hawthorne, the young writer who had brought the case to their door, had been left at her modest lodgings in Bloomsbury, her eyes still wide with the relief of a mystery resolved. The adventure of the haunted inkwell had drawn to a close, but as was often the case with Holmes, the final threads of reflection and revelation were yet to be woven. Inside the warmth of their sitting room, Mrs. Hudson had already stoked the fire, its crackling glow casting long shadows across the cluttered space. Holmes placed the inkwell on the mantelpiece, where it sat beside a chipped teacup and a stack of unanswered correspondence. Watson, ever the chronicler, settled into his armchair, his notebook open on his lap, though his pen remained idle for the moment. The weight of the case lingered in the air, as did the faint scent of Clara's lavender perfume, a reminder of her nervous presence earlier that evening. Holmes paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes darting to the inkwell. Now and then, "A curious affair, Watson," he said at last, his voice low but deliberate. "A trinket of brass and glass, imbued with centuries of superstition, yet nothing more than a conjurer's prop, and yet how it ensnared the minds of so many." Watson nodded, his brow furrowed. "It's remarkable, Holmes, how a simple mechanism could inspire such fear and ambition. The Order of the Saffron Veil, Professor Mordecai, even poor Clara, they all believed in the inkwell's power. Belief, my dear Watson, is the most potent weapon of all," Holmes replied, pausing by the window to peer into the fog. "It drives men to madness, to murder, to the most elaborate of deceptions. The inkwell was but a catalyst for their desires." The case had begun with Clara's midnight summons, her tale of whispers and movement in her grandfather's antique inkwell. Holmes had seen through the supernatural veneer from the start, suspecting a mechanical trick, but the layers of intrigue ciphers, secret societies, and alchemical lore had kept even him on his toes. The final confrontation at Professor Mordecai's estate had been a triumph of reason over illusion, with Holmes dismantling the Order's ritual as a concoction of chemicals and mirrors. Yet, as Watson watched his friend, he sensed there was more to be said, some final piece of the puzzle Holmes had yet to share. "Shall I fetch the tea, Holmes?" Watson asked, breaking the silence. Mrs. Hudson left a tray before she retired. Holmes waved a hand dismissively. "In a moment, Watson. First, let us revisit the inkwell itself. There is a detail, a trifling one, perhaps, that has not yet been fully addressed." Watson raised an eyebrow, setting his notebook aside. "A detail?" "You've already exposed the clockwork mechanism, the chemical residue that caused the glow. What more could there be?" Holmes retrieved the inkwell from the mantel, holding it up to the firelight. The brass gleamed dully, its arcane carvings etched deep into the metal. "The mechanism explains the movement and the whispers," he said, turning the object in his hands. "The residue accounts for the glow. But there is one element that troubles me: the precision of the hoax. The alchemist who crafted this, one Elias Varnholt, was no mere tinkerer. His work suggests a mind attuned to both science and showmanship, a rare combination in the 17th century. Watson leaned forward, intrigued. "You think there's more to Varnholt's intent? Consider the Order of the Saffron Veil." Holmes continued, setting the inkwell on the table. "A secret society, centuries old, built around the myth of this inkwell. Varnholt's journal, which we found in the chapel, spoke of binding a spirit to the inkwell, a fanciful notion, of course. But what if his true aim was not to summon a spirit, but to create a legend? A legacy that would endure, manipulating generations to come?" Watson frowned, trying to follow. "You mean he designed the inkwell to deceive deliberately? To what end?" "Power, Watson. Not the supernatural kind, but the kind that comes from controlling belief. The Order's members, scholars, nobles, even the likes of Lady Vance, were drawn to the inkwell's promise of forbidden knowledge. Varnholt, I suspect, understood the human craving for the unknown and crafted a tool to exploit it." Holmes's words hung in the air, and Watson felt a chill despite the fire's warmth. The idea that a man centuries dead could wield such influence was unsettling, even to a pragmatist like himself. "But why go to such lengths?" he asked. "Why create something so elaborate?" Holmes smiled faintly, a rare glimpse of admiration. "In his eyes, for immortality, of course. Not of the body, but of the mind. Varnholt's name is forgotten, yet his creation has sparked fear, greed, and devotion for over 200 years. In that, he succeeded where many fail." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a tray of tea and biscuits, her expression one of mild exasperation. "I heard you talking, Mr. Holmes, and thought you'd be up half the night if I didn't bring this up. You'll wear poor Dr. Watson out with your mysteries." Holmes inclined his head, a trace of amusement in his voice. "Your foresight is appreciated, Mrs. Hudson. We shall endeavor not to keep the house awake." As she departed, Watson poured the tea, the steam curling upward in the firelight. "So what now?" he asked, handing Holmes a cup. "The inkwell is debunked, the Order scattered, Mordecai disgraced. Is the case truly closed?" Holmes sipped his tea, his gaze fixed on the inkwell. "For Clara, yes. She has her peace, and the inkwell will trouble her no more. But for us, Watson, there is always another question, another shadow to chase. The Order may have fled, but their kind, those who prey on belief, will always find another relic, another myth." Watson nodded, accustomed to Holmes's restless mind. "And the inkwell itself, will you keep it as a memento?" Holmes chuckled, a rare sound. "No, Watson. It belongs with Clara. Let it sit on her desk, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked imagination. Besides, our mantelpiece is cluttered enough." The next morning, Holmes and Watson set out for Bloomsbury, the Inkwell once again in Holmes's pocket. The fog had lifted, and London bustled with its usual chaos, vendors hawking their wares, omnibuses rattling by, and newsboys shouting headlines about a scandal in Parliament. Clara's lodgings were a modest affair, a narrow townhouse with ivy creeping up its brick facade. She greeted them at the door, her face brighter than it had been during their first meeting. "Mr. Holmes." "Dr. Watson," she said, ushering them inside. "I can't thank you enough. I've slept soundly for the first time in weeks." Holmes inclined his head. "The mind rests easier when shadows are explained, Miss Hawthorne. Here is your Inkwell, free of its secrets." He handed her the brass object, now polished to a dull shine. Clara took it, her fingers tracing the carvings with a mix of reverence and relief. "I thought it cursed, you know. My grandfather used to tell such stories, spirits, rituals, ancient pacts. I half believed them. And now?" Holmes asked, his eyes keen. "Now I see it for what it is," she replied. "A clever trick. Nothing more. I'll keep it as a reminder to trust my own reason." Watson smiled, warmed by her resolve. "A wise choice, Miss Hawthorne, and perhaps it will inspire your next novel." Clara laughed, a light, genuine sound. "Perhaps it will. Though I think I'll stick to fiction, not occult mysteries." As they spoke, Holmes's attention wandered to a small writing desk in the corner of the room, where a stack of papers lay neatly arranged. "Your work progresses, I see," he remarked. "Yes," Clara said, her cheeks flushing. I've been writing again, now that the Inkwell no longer distracts me. It's a story about a detective, actually." "Not unlike yourself, Mr. Holmes." Holmes raised an eyebrow, amused. "I trust he's a man of logic, not superstition." "Of course," Clara replied with a smile, "though I may add a touch of mystery for the readers." They lingered for a few minutes, exchanging pleasantries, before Holmes and Watson took their leave. As they stepped back into the street, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the city. Watson glanced at his friend, noting the faint satisfaction in his expression. "You're pleased with the outcome, Holmes," he observed. Holmes nodded, his hands in his pockets. "A case resolved, a mind freed from fear, and a puzzle unraveled. It is enough, Watson." They walked in companionable silence, the Inkwell's mystery now a memory. Back at Baker Street, Watson resumed his chronicle, his pen moving steadily. Across the page, the story of the haunted Inkwell would join the others in his growing collection, a testament to Holmes's brilliance and the enduring allure of the unknown. As evening fell, Holmes stood by the window, a violin tucked under his chin. The strains of a melancholy tune filled the room, blending with the crackle of the fire. Watson paused his writing, listening as the notes wove a story of their own, one of shadows, secrets, and the triumph of reason. And on Clara's desk, the Inkwell sat quietly, its carvings catching the lamplight, no longer a vessel of fear, but a silent witness to the power of truth. The days that followed were quiet, at least by the standards of Sherlock Holmes. No urgent telegrams arrived, no frantic clients pounded on the door. Watson used the time to polish his account of the Inkwell case, though he knew Holmes would likely dismiss it as sensationalized. Still, The act of writing brought clarity, and Watson found himself reflecting on the broader implications of the case. The Order of the Saffron Veil, though scattered, had revealed a troubling truth about human nature. Their belief in the Inkwells. Power had driven them to deceit, violence, and obsession. Watson wondered how many other relics, real or imagined, held sway over men's minds. The thought was sobering, yet it reinforced his admiration for Holmes, whose relentless logic cut through such illusions like a blade. One afternoon, as Watson was revising his manuscript, Holmes returned from a solitary walk, his greatcoat dusted with the first flakes of an early snow. "You're still at it, Watson," he remarked, glancing at the papers strewn across the table. "I am," Watson replied, unperturbed. "This case deserves to be recorded. It's not every day we tangle with alchemists and secret societies." Holmes smirked, shedding his coat. "You romanticize it, as always. But I suppose there's no harm in it, provided you don't exaggerate." "My methods," Watson chuckled. "I'll do my best, Holmes. Though I dare say the public will find the Inkwell story gripping enough without embellishment." Holmes settled into his chair, reaching for his pipe. "The public craves mystery, Watson. They want the supernatural, the inexplicable. That is why Von Holt's Inkwell endured. It fed their hunger for the unknown. And you starve that." "Hunger," Watson said, half in jest. "On the contrary," Holmes replied, lighting his pipe. "I feed it with truth. The unknown is only unknown until it is examined. Then it becomes merely a fact." Watson shook his head, smiling. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," Holmes said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "The challenge lies in seeing clearly when others are blinded by fear or desire." Their conversation was interrupted by a telegram delivered by a breathless boy who vanished as quickly as he'd come. Holmes read the message, his expression unreadable. "It seems our respite is at an end, Watson," he said, passing the slip of paper. Watson scanned it, his pulse quickening. A murder in Whitechapel, a cryptic symbol carved into the victim's hand. "Another puzzle," he said, meeting Holmes's gaze. "Indeed," Holmes replied, a spark of anticipation in his eyes. "Fetch your coat, Watson. The game is afoot." And so, the Inkwell case faded into the background, another chapter in the endless saga of Sherlock Holmes. The Inkwell itself remained with Clara, a quiet reminder of a mystery solved, while Holmes and Watson turned their sights to the next challenge, ready to pierce the veil of the unknown once more. Chapter 11. The Silent Quill. First light of dawn crept through the curtains of 221B Baker Street, casting a soft, golden hue over the familiar chaos of Sherlock Holmes's sitting room. Dr. John Watson sat at his writing desk, his pen scratching steadily across the page as he committed the final details of the haunted Inkwell case to paper. The Inkwell itself had been returned to Clara Hawthorne days earlier, and with it, the shadows that had clung to their lives seemed to dissipate like morning mist. Yet as Watson glanced at Holmes, who lounged in his armchair with a pipe clenched between his teeth, he sensed that the detective's mind still lingered on the affair, dissecting it with the precision of a surgeon. "A fine tale, Watson," Holmes remarked without looking up from the chemical treatise he held. "Though I suspect you'll embellish the ritual at Mordecai's estate for dramatic effect. The public does love a touch of the supernatural, even when it's been thoroughly debunked." Watson chuckled, capping his pen. "Guilty as charged, Holmes. But the truth is compelling enough. A centuries-old hoax, a fanatical society, and your unerring logic piercing through it all. Clara's letter arrived this morning. She's well, and the Inkwell now serves as nothing more than a paperweight on her desk. No more whispers, no more glows. Holmes nodded, exhaling a curl of smoke that danced toward the ceiling. As it should be. The Order of the Saffron Veil has been dismantled, its members scattered or in custody. Professor Mordecai's trial will expose the fragility of their delusions. Yet, this case reminds us, Watson, of the enduring power of belief. Varnholt's creation was a masterpiece not of alchemy, but of psychology, a device engineered to exploit the human thirst for mystery. Watson leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. And what of the chemical residue? You never fully explained its persistence. Was it truly just phosphorescence? Holmes set his book aside, his gaze sharpening. A compound of radium salts, Watson, mixed with a stabilizer I identified as a derivative of barium sulfide, rare for its time, but Varnholt was ahead of his era. The glow was no ectoplasm, but a simple reaction to light and air. The whispers? A concealed reed mechanism, vibrating with subtle air pressure from the clockwork. The movement? Magnets and hidden springs. All prosaic, yet ingeniously combined to mimic the arcane. There was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a silver tray with a letter sealed in wax. "For you, Mr. Holmes," she said, her tone laced with curiosity. "Delivered by hand, from that young Miss Hawthorne." Holmes broke the seal and scanned the contents, a faint smile touching his lips. "Clara writes to express her gratitude once more. She's completed her novel, a tale of reason triumphing over superstition, inspired by our involvement. She encloses a small token." From the envelope, he withdrew a single feather quill, its tip sharpened and inked, as if ready for use. Watson smiled. "A fitting gift. Perhaps she'll dedicate the book to you." "Unlikely," Holmes replied, placing the quill beside his violin. "But it serves as a reminder. The pen, like the mind, is mightier than any phantom." The morning wore on, and as the fog lifted outside, revealing a bustling London, Watson felt a sense of closure. The Inkwell case had been one of illusions and deceptions, but it had reaffirmed the unbreakable bond between him and Holmes, a partnership forged in the fires of logic and loyalty. Yet, as always, tranquility was fleeting. Another telegram arrived by noon, bearing news of a perplexing theft at the British Museum. An ancient artifact vanished without trace, leaving only a cryptic symbol in its place. Holmes's eyes lit with that familiar fire as he read it. "The game begins anew, Watson," he said, rising with purpose. "Fetch your hat. Mysteries wait for no man." Watson nodded, pocketing his notebook. As they stepped into the street, the door of 221B closing behind them, the haunted Inkwell faded into memory, a silent quill in the vast tome of their adventures. Reason had prevailed, and the world, with all its enigmas, spun on.